John's away today, so I'm chairing, so to speak, but I'm just trying to get into my OneDrive, so I don't have the agenda in front of me, so I apologise for that, but I'm going to hand it over to you and then I'll hopefully have an agenda shortly.
Sure, good morning. Kia ora everyone. Thank you for having us again another week on the Water Services CCO. So I have Sinead Hart here with us today. Sinead introduce herself. The goal of this first hour is just to have a conversation and we step through Sinead's presentation around decision making between now and the go live date of 1 July 2027. Over to you, Sinead.
Good morning, and thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to you this morning. As mentioned, my name is Sinead Hart. I am a commercial lawyer by background and have been doing a lot of work in the water sector transactions, bringing businesses together. Recent experience is in Waikato Waters, where we brought together 6 councils. So we go live in terms of Waikato Waters in less than 2 months. So I'm completely alive to the complexity and the work involved in terms of the journey you're about to undertake. I know there's been a lot of discussion, a lot of decisions made to date, and just observe that some significant milestones about to be achieved with the announcement of the chair, and obviously future board in train, and then incorporation for 1 July, I understand. So my role in terms of why I'm here today is supporting Maz and the establishment team with the significant program of work that's required to set up QLDC 3 Waters for 1 July 2027. So in front of you, what you have is slides, and I don't have a clicker.
Is the clicker? Just want to try this now. I think we're noting in live, we're recorded.
Yeah. There we go. So really the purpose of today is, I guess, to prepare the road ahead. So the entity will be incorporated, as we said, in due course. And from that time, the board will be in place. That board will be overseeing the establishment program in preparation for day 1, when the actual water services responsibilities will transfer from council across into the new entity. So we've got that critical phase, kind of like the renovation of a house when you're doing a bit of a room configuration. We've got that messy period where water services sit with council, where you've got another governing body that's preparing to receive those assets and plan the road ahead with you in terms of how that business should operate. So the purpose of the transition governance and support agreement that I'll talk through today is really just to try and set out what's the framework within which these 2 governing bodies will engage with each other during this next critical phase. So what we will go through is, I'll give you some context. We'll go through governance and decision making. From the constitutional documents and the documentation that I've seen to date, we've come up with some founding commitments. This is all draft. This is all for input, feedback. Nothing is predetermined. So it's just an introduction to give you a flavour of where the thinking is at this point in time, and knowing that something will come back to you in a more sophisticated and fleshed out manner. So it is an iterative process, but I think that that's necessary to get it right and to make sure that we don't miss anything. So just wanted to give you that. We'll then go into what's proposed in terms of council support to the CCO as it comes into existence and tries to find its legs, and key messages, next steps. So in terms of transition, so as I said before, we're going to have 2 governing bodies. We're going to have elected members who obviously represent the communities. We've then got the board of the CCO who has been appointed by council. So this transition is going to be complex. We just have to accept that. It's just one of those things. Major change is complex. But during that, we can manage that complexity by being quite clear as to how we're going to collaborate and work together through it. So balancing 2 equally important priorities is what we're talking about today, where council is going to maintain control and service continuity of water services during the transition. But the CCO has to be empowered to do the very thing it's been created to do, which is to build capability and try to learn and decide how is it going to operate independently and deliver on the strategic priorities that will be set forward by the council. So the proposed agreement will set out how this tension can be managed during this transition period. So the purpose of the workshop is to explain the proposed content for this agreement. It's not a very snappy title. We are going with Transition Support and Governance Agreement. It is literally what it says on the tin, but we'll go through why is it needed? What does it contain? As I said, really welcome your initial thoughts and input, but won't be the only opportunity that you get. So happy for you to percolate and think about it and come back in future iterations. And then we'll outline next steps. So what is changing? Well, we know that the CCO is going to be incorporated, and we know that it will be a separate legal entity owned by this council. We know that council will continue to run the services up until 30 June 2027. And we know that you're appointing a board and charging that board with building tomorrow's organisation, and with the intent of that being effective from 1 July 27. We know that council will be making decisions for water services during that period, but the board will be accountable and making decisions for the establishment delivery. So, boil all of that up. The key question is, what are the roles and responsibilities between the board of the CCO and council during this time at a governance level? So we're just talking at governance level and for that aspect of things, but also from an operational perspective. All that happens when you incorporate a company, as we know, is you create a shelf company. It's just an entity on a piece of paper. There needs to be funding, there needs to be services, there needs to be a lot of flesh, I suppose, put into that to enable it to become operational. So what's the support that council is going to provide during that particular period? So I don't profess to know everything that goes through your minds, but this is, I guess, best guess as to what's changing from a council perspective. So the CCO will be governed by the board, is probably the key thing. The programme director and the team who now report to the council CE will be accountable to the CCO board. The establishment delivery will come under the remit of the board. It's the board's responsibility to drive delivery and deliver on what you have asked it to do, which is set up this organisation. Oversight will be exercised through the shareholder role and defined transition governance mechanisms. So it's really just that shift in governance where some of the governance is moving out of council into the next room, and just as I said, as part of that kind of renovation. So the transition governance and support agreement is critical to managing that shift. Now, one of the things that Maz and I have talked about is this is just the output. The agreement, when it's finalised, is the output of discussions. The key part is the collaboration, the discussion that happens to actually feed into that agreement and make sure that everybody's on board. So what we're looking for is an output. We're not trying to dictate, I guess, is the key point there. So the transition agreement overview, if we had to simplistically divide it into two different segments, there's the governance content, which supports strong board accountability. So that just goes to what the board has been charged to do. It sets out what decisions matter most. Now, I'll get into the detail of this as we go through, but what decisions matter most and define what's the decision-making authority. And a lot of that is with reference to like legal artifacts, the Companies Act. It's not like we're just deciding that the board will make these decisions. It's just a consequence of how separate legal entity will operate. And then obviously during this critical phase that we're coming into, the board will have a degree of oversight as to what is it going to inherit, but obviously it's not the decision maker, and therefore how does it have that oversight without operational interference? In terms of the transition side, just really want to ensure we can enable a coordinated delivery of the establishment programme. So if we put the work in now as to what needs to be done and how it's going to happen, then the team can just hit the road and start delivering on those key milestones. It is a challenging time frame, which will be 1 July 26 to 1 July 27, and quite a lot of things that need to be done. It's very, very doable, but obviously when everybody knows what they're doing, it's just that making sure you use resources and both cash and people as efficiently as possible. So in the agreement, we propose to confirm the establishment funding arrangements and confirm the support from council. So that's the access to people, systems, facilities. If we look at the CCO as your child, what does it need in that early stage to just start off? Now, I thought it might be helpful, and I hope it is, to differentiate between the transition agreement and the transfer agreement. So during the course of the establishment program, if I'm telling you what you already know, forgive me, but I'm going to assume that you haven't gone into detail on the transfer agreement yet. But essentially, you will hear about the transfer agreement. And what it is you've agreed in principle that the water services business will lift out of council and move across into the CCO. But what does that mean? What's actually moving? What are the terms on which it's moved? What are the shares that the council is going to get in the entity? All of these things need to be worked through. So the transfer agreement is the what. It's getting into the weeds, getting into the specifics. So there's 100% clarity that it's that car that's coming across, or wastewater treatment plant, or what's the tenure in relation to property on which an asset is on. A lot of detail, but just being clear that the transfer agreement confirms what happens on day one. So what lifts out of council and goes across to the CCO. In contrast, the transition governance agreement is more about navigating decision making. And so it's, as I say here, roles, responsibilities, accountability, and how do we work together. So one is very transition, the other is kind of that point in time. This is what's happened. This is what is in the CCO. These are the assets, but in terms of its opening balance sheet.
I'm just conscious that as we move through, do you want us to have questions as we go, or sort of wait till the end?
Yes. Happy with questions.
Oh, yeah. We're just conscious we are moving through quite a bit of stuff, so it might be useful to just stop at a few points.
Yeah, I'm happy to pause there and yeah, whenever and just see if there's any questions at this point.
Anybody? Okay, no, all right.
Just let me know. So this is the current governance model. So everything is within inside QLDC. You've got the elected members who have got the program control group sitting at an executive level with delegated authority. They're overseeing the program delivery, reporting back to this council, and escalating material issues. Reporting into the CE is the program director, and then the program team at this point in time obviously reports back into the program director as well. So that's the chain of command at this point in time, because we're working obviously within one entity organization. This looks a little bit messy, but it's not. What will happen is there's going to be, as I say, that reconfiguration of the rooms. We're going to create the entity. The board of directors will be accountable for the entity. The CEO, program director, will move across and report into the board, and the chain of command under that will remain the same. So the establishment delivery team will move across as well. Council obviously remains at the top as both as the shareholder, and obviously will be the owner, appointer of the board, and will be holding that board to account. So as we know, there's a planning and accountability framework that's set out in the local government water services. So that will be wrapped around the right-hand side of that slide in front of you. On the left-hand side, it will be business as usual, essentially, for council, in terms of its operations, and with matters that relate to water going into the PCG. So there's some degree of oversight, I guess, as from the CCO side as to what's happening in that space. If the company has to live with the consequences of decisions made today, what are they? And how do they factor that into their plan? So it's not a control, it's just an education, because as we know, the more information we have, the more data that we have, the better the decisions that we make. And in between the two, what is proposed is what we're calling the transition interface group. So that would be a forum between council ELT members and CCO program director. And it really is just to coordinate what's happening in the program. what's that going to impact in terms of council's business, what needs to be escalated, and just working through the detail. There's a hand that has gone. Yeah, do you just pause it?
Yeah, sorry, yeah, Nikki's got a question. Go, Nikki.
Thanks. Thanks, Quentin. You might be covering it off, but I'm really interested in this transition interface group, and you know, it says coordinates and escalates issues, but where is the risk kind of control framework around that? Who's developing that? Is it, you know, this is a new thing. We don't have anything in place necessarily as council. We have a risk management framework, but I just want to be certain, I guess, that they have sufficient guidance to escalate the right things at the right time to the right people, whether that be the board or us or both. Just needs, is there something coming that will settle that out really clearly or not?
What I'll do, Councillor Nikki, if you're comfortable, is take that, put it to the side, and at the end we'll come back to it. I do believe it is addressed, but I'll invite you to confirm that that is indeed the case when we get to the end of the slides.
And Matt.
Just interested if the transition interface group reports directly back up to council. So whether there's an arrow that goes from transition interface group that goes directly back up to circular.
No, yes, but through the PCG. So the interface group, the representatives of council on the interface group will be those from the program control group as it's currently formed,
right,
or known, and so it would report into the PCG. But that's a matter that's purely on council side. So if there is a preference to how that reporting line works from the transition interface group, then that's completely open to discussion. This is just an indication on the basis of the existing and how that could change.
I'm thinking it would go that way. So, you know, this line here to council through the PCG goes up there, and then the CCO goes up to the board.
I mean, I think the point is that just trying to understand the role of governance in the transition, and you know what happens. How do you get the feedback loop on problems and stuff? And I think it's a fair question.
Exactly.
Yeah. So I might get up and indicate what I'm thinking about. So I wonder if the way this is laid out is, for me, it just grated a little bit, because, and given the question that John Glover asked, and he asked this week, I think today, you know, about regular meetings between the chair of the board and her. So in reality, for me, the boards should sit higher up, because what's not indicated here is that that's a governance relationship, I think. And here, these should be on more of a par with the CEO and leadership team of the CCO should be on the same level as here. And then the rest of it flows. For me at the moment, it just seems a bit lopsided.
But this is only for the establishment phase.
Sure, but
and the statement of expectation does detail a number of meetings to be had. On an ongoing basis. This is for the first year.
Sure. I think
so we have to
this
be
is
careful.
our high risk.
We don't add a level of circular loop and complexity that slows this whole process down.
No, I think you're right.
I think you're right. Ensures the correct level of governance.
That's right. Yeah.
Because I mean, the transition interface group is just trying to make sure that transitions across.
Yeah, and the decisions are made by the right parties.
Correct.
Yeah.
That's not going to help.
But this is the highest risk phase that we've got, guys. Like, this transition is critical to manage it, but also govern it well. Otherwise, we could end up with all sorts of issues. So that's what we're trying to prevent by creating a structure that actually will achieve that.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's two clear points there. I think is the risk and the governance feedback.
I think the terms of reference for the transition interface group will solve some of what you're talking about. And also, you know, when Sinead put this together, it's quite sort of transactional, but we're very mindful that the value is all the relationship stuff, which is yet to be read out, if you like, because it was another level of detail.
That's probably the point John was making.
Yeah.
That didn't come across clearly in that. So yeah.
Sorry.
That's all right. We'll keep going, I think, but those points are very valid, I think.
Yeah, no, they're 100% valid and very good points. And I guess with this slide, just to confirm, it was really trying to get the dual roles of council as opposed to try and say that the board of directors wouldn't be engaging with council at a governance level. And as I said, that relationship between the chair of the board and the mayor and elected members is crucial. That is how you're going to blast through issues which will arise. No amount of planning is going to preempt absolutely everything. So, yeah, so we'll look at how we can reconfigure that to make the same point, but in a linear fashion.
I think what this diagram doesn't capture, and probably the appendix capture, is that transitional role of council as a governance body itself from the current format to being a shared governance body.
That's true.
Yeah. No, good feedback. Thank you. So, establishment governance overview. So, I guess just at a high level, going through what's happening within the context of those three forums that we've discussed. Council, as we've said, will deliver the water services up until day one, intended to be 1 July 27. It will retain decision making for water services to them. It will be responsible for the shareholder matters. So that'll be what's the amount of funding that's going to, but not only in relation to the establishment with the local government funding agency, there is input that's required from council to support the CCO acceding to the LGFA multi-issuer deed. So just noting that. We've talked about the transfer agreement, and obviously council is going to be a counterparty to that particular agreement, which lists what is going to transfer. And it may not get everything, but we deal with that. I'll come back and give you the joy of learning how we deal with that in the context of the agreement itself. And then obviously a key thing for the shareholder will be statement of expectations, which I understand you have well underway. In terms of the board, it will, as I said before, govern the CCO and prepare for day one operation. So part of its job will be really getting down into what's its water services strategy, and particularly for the first 3 years, and that will be informed to quite a large degree by the statement of expectations, but also the work that comes out of the programme of the establishment team and the programme of work. So it will build capability, the systems and the team. So the transition interface is sitting between those two and just ensuring early engagement on all major decisions. And I define what major decisions or the proposed definition for major decisions later in the slide. So bear with me and I will come to that. But the key thing is information sharing and no surprises. There are a lot of touch points between council's business and the CCO during this time. And, you know, as you prepare for assets to come across, staff to come across, data to come across, it's really just working through that and making sure that the process is managed, and not just from a technical perspective, but from a human side as well, and because change can be quite unsettling for people.
I think that was my main concern, was the no surprises piece for us as governance, because it's going to have to move fast, I suspect.
Yeah, and keeping that information flow, so figuring out what is the appropriate level of information and the appropriate, absolutely. So major decisions. So the idea of introducing these major decisions is to ensure that the CCO has input into decisions that can affect its future viability. Now, I cannot speak obviously on behalf of the chair or the board, but it really is just trying to get that end goal of, 10 years from now, the CCO and the council, you want to have a good relationship where there's naturally just picking up the phone, we're going to collaborate. So how do you start that exercise? So as the chair comes on board together with boards, there's a lot of boards going on there, but as they come on, they don't know this business to the same degree. They don't know the challenges, and it really is just ensuring that they get an understanding of the decisions that are being made now, and they have to live with the consequences of them, and obviously try and take the decisions at a point in time and develop the water services strategy going forward. So it's just trying to start that interconnection or relationship between the two, so that that knowledge passes over, and as I said, there's kind of greater clarity as decision making gets underway. I just want to be quite clear that when we talk about major decisions in this agreement, it's different from major transactions under the Constitution and the Companies Act. That's quite prescribed and mainly goes to kind of the structure of the entity, whereas this is the kind of substance of the decisions that will be made. So what we propose is that the major decisions framework would apply to decisions that materially affect future business, strategy, purely for water, and operating model or financial position of the CCR, and the service delivery of sustainability. I would think that as the board comes on, the one thing they would want to ensure is that the level of service at a minimum is kept the same. There should be no drop in the level of service. So anything that could impact that goal, we've kind of put in here. And applies to decisions that materially affect assets, liabilities, or anything that would transfer across. And we're boxing a little bit of shadows. We don't know all decisions that you're going to be asked to make. We're just trying to set up a framework that says, right, let's just sit down and have a conversation at a particular point in time, just to understand key drivers in decision making at a point in time. And then just kind of a quite high level and open-ended, and we can try and pin it down a bit, but really it's just trying to say, what are the decisions that could affect the CCO's ability to operate effectively from day one? And that's all that it's trying to do, is ensure that knowledge sharing is happening at the right forum, going to the point raised earlier, at the right level.
Nikki, I think the question.
Sorry.
I'm not sure this is the right place, because it's not really a major decision, but it is. And it affects, you know, both organisations, is the staff piece. And I know we probably can't talk too much about it, but at a really high level, how do we decide how the split happens in some of those roles? Where does that sit along the transition pathway, and how do we go about it?
Morning, Nikki, it's Maz here. So that is part of the establishment team work. So there is a work stream which is focused on organisation, people and transfer, and part of that is determining what the operating model and needs are of the entity, but also what is the capability that we have internally and how we lift and shift that.
Right. So my question, I guess, is how do we have oversight over that?
Yeah, so the outcome of that, like in the current model, would be through the PCG. So that's not an enduring PCG. So as we move forward, that would be a matter that we would join up on. So the interface, with the interface group.
Okay. In practical terms, I'm just interested in understanding how this works, because people obviously have agency, right? People can decide where they want to go. You know, are roles advertised? Are they not? How do we, which roles do we keep? This is operational stuff, but there's an oversight component that I think is important. So just flagging that, you know, I don't know where this sits in here, but I think we need to have some oversight over it. To understand what the organisation looks like, how P&I is structured afterwards, how that affects our capability.
Staff pathway and the transfer agreement a few slides back, so I don't know whether that's...
Yes, so we wouldn't be talking too much about anything in relation to employment relations, and you know, we would be providing you with assurance, but when we'd landed on what might be the proposed operating model for the CCO, that would go through the board first, and then we would bring that back, because that is going to have to be a joint kind of decision, because it will also obviously feed into what's left.
I mean,
remains council.
So are there a list of these kind of joint decisions and a time frame for them that's set out? These really practical things that have to occur that involve both parties. Do we have?
So I think that there's two different things. So I guess the purpose of this slide is really looking at council decision making during the establishment phase and the extent to which the board will be involved in that. So that's one side of it. We call it a bridge. On the other side of the bridge, the board will come on board and we'll have accountability of the establishment program. And part of that establishment program will be the operating model, it will be the organisation structure, what are the roles that are needed to set this entity up for success. And I guess with the clarity of that structure, it's then possible to sit down and sensibly have a conversation with staff as to where do they see themselves in that new structure. And one of the things, as you rightly say, is the pathway for staff to come from council across. Obviously, you don't transfer staff just from a legal perspective. You can't. It's an offer and acceptance that you have to go through, because there is, as you rightly point out, Councillor Nicky, that degree of agency. So all of that is in the establishment programme, and there will be touch points that need to be agreed as we work through that, but the detail just isn't available. But take on board exactly what you're saying, and what happens in terms of who moves across to the CCO will have an impact on the business accounts, and that needs to be addressed. But I guess the thing I use in my head is a bridge, and both sides of the bridge need to be strong for it to hold up.
Yes.
So the appointment, Nikki, hang on a second. The jobs will have to be disestablished on the council side, and then don't sign any contract.
I don't think we should be talking about any of these in detail at this point, because
I suggest that.
Well, I suppose
there's a fair amount. There is a risk there, and it's well highlighted, and there's also a big employment landscape with regards to this. We have to be careful about what the aspects we'd want to discuss in a public forum. And obviously this is a process that will be an extensive change programme with our staff, and this process from the CCO side has to dovetail with the future of QLDC work as to how our operation functions on the other side of the bridge at the same time. So we will be surfacing this with you. We do not have that detail at this point in time, and obviously there will be we will make sure that what we're sharing with you is appropriate governance materials as opposed to getting into the weeds of the operations. But obviously we're open to discussion around this.
I do think we need to decide what is appropriate governance material and what we need lifted up. So we need to have a bit of, to understand what questions to ask. I think we need to have a bit more detail on the establishment program. You've said that's in the background. This is very good and high level, these slides, but I would like to see more detail of the program in the background. Thanks.
I think the way that we would move that forward is we're heading towards a level 4 program, which is quite detailed. As part of this, we would kind of work out what we think the board make calls on, what council make calls on, and then what needs to be shared. And that would be the basis of the terms of reference. And then we would float that. So it looked like Sinead was saying, it is iterative. But I think we hear what you're saying is that you want more transparency into what are all these little things. Not everything.
We need to understand some stuff moving from here to here. Potentially there's going to be some legal ramifications that somebody will take some advice on, not us. But at a granular level and individuals and stuff like, I think that's appropriate.
We would be proposing operational.
Yeah.
No.
We should
Getting into that detail is much further down the track, and some of it is going to depend on the CCO board who to be appointed, and the CEO is even further from being appointed, deciding what the organisation is going to look like before people can consider whether they're going to apply for any role.
I'm not sure that we can set the terms of reference right now and foresee everything. This is, and so some of this is going to be cultural. And cultural, when I say cultural, I don't want to sound too feely touchy, but I have a lot of confidence in the fact that that the person we flagged as the chair of the board is very good at that cultural interchange. And so I'm not sure how we're going to do this, but there's going to have to be a lot of unwritten stuff, handshake, communication back and forth. Maybe it has to be a subgroup of council that is constantly doing that, because I come from this old thing of rules are for fools. We can set up everything now. We can't foresee everything. And so therefore it's going to be literally how we interface on a very soft basis.
Absolutely. And the point of today is really just to make sure that we all understand that the landscape is changing, and that it is not any longer just council who makes the calls. There's a board, there's all these moving parts. We're not going to be going away squirreling away working out terms of reference and things, because there's a timeline of when we need to do these things, and the board and the CEO, well, the board primarily will be key to a number of these things. So I think we hear what you're saying. There is a mix around level of granularity, but being an operations person myself, I would not be interested in tabling operational decisions with elected members unless you were very directive about that. So you can expect that they would be quite high level to start with.
It's fine.
Yeah,
Let's keep going.
just final
Nikki,
2 seconds on this, because
let's move on.
We're moving on. Thank you.
So the process, look, 100% agree, we're not going to preempt everything, and relationships are key, but it's just putting that framework around those relationships so that there's a degree, I suppose, of assistance in navigating it. So the approach we're proposing is that would be early engagement with the CCO, information sharing, time for the CCO to know, but this in relation to the major decisions, just going back to that point, and just asking that council will consider that input before making the decision. Why it matters, it goes to that point of no surprises, and fully accept that no surprises works both ways when it comes to what it may be that the board's up to in that relationship. I'm sure that the chair will have means of communicating and providing updates. It protects the future viability of the CCO. It maintains council's oversight where it matters most. And the whole purpose of the major decisions process is to support a smooth, low-risk transition as we approach day one. Fully accept it's not perfect, and it is transitional. It's about balancing control and readiness, and it does, as I think we're all in agreement, it does rely on strong collaboration for the common goal, and with the key objective of everyone being the best outcome for communities and ratepayers. So not losing sight of kind of who the end beneficiaries of this work program will be. So I'm not going to speak to the slides, kind of just in detail. It really is just kind of a proposal as to how that process could work, setting it out in a staged manner, so that everybody can see, okay, well, the chair is speaking to the mayor at a particular point, and you can see where it is in that numerical process list. But as I say, this is just a proposal. It may be that the chair himself comes on board and decides this isn't how I operate. I'd like to do this a little bit different, and because he and potentially other members of the board I'm sorry. They will potentially have ideas from their own governance experience as to how to navigate through this period.
So Sinead, in this process, or when we get to that council decision, will the transition agreement say that if we work through this process, that the CCO has to take over? So you've got the transition agreement and then you've got the transfer agreement, right?
Yeah.
What I don't want to see is a decision made under the transition agreement that doesn't then get accepted into the transfer agreement,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So we make a decision in our transition phase, and when we get the transfer agreement, CCO says, well, we never liked that decision that you made. We're not taking that asset. How do we protect against something like that? You know, so we're talking about a process where we get input and then we make a decision.
Yeah.
What if they turn around afterwards and go, well, we never liked that decision. We don't want that wastewater plant. We don't want that. Can the transition agreement have a clause that says if we follow this process and we're fair and reasonable, that they have to take it?
I was going to say they presumably have to take the assets lock stock. I wouldn't have thought they get to pick and choose which ones they take. But anyway, that's an interesting question.
Well, that's
Yeah.
is that correct? The transfer agreement still to be.
There's two different
Size,
sides, right? So the transfer agreement, like the legal, this is what you're getting, debt and assets, people, blah, blah, blah. And then this is around how do we work together between now and then on decisions that would typically come to you all and only to you all. So it won't be specific around, during this period, they said the treatment plant's going over. And then on, day one, the board's like, actually not sure about that. I think that this is more about, how do we work together? It's not the particular thing.
Yeah, totally get that. But where is the legal requirement for them to take all the assets?
Yeah, it's a big question.
That is the whole purpose for creating the CCO. So the transfer agreement will be premised upon all assets that primarily relate to the delivery of water services must transfer across. Now, there might be a few little fringe items, and I don't mean that in terms of the CCO being selective. There might be certain land, for example, where it's sensitive, or there's some cultural issues, whatever it may be. And some other alternative arrangement rather than a pure transfer has to take place. I'm not thinking of specifics, I don't know enough of the detail. Going to your point, yes, and we come to the, I think we call them the transfer commitments.
Right.
We will put those in the agreement, that there's clarity on the parameters of what must come across. And I would say that the incoming chair and board would have oversight of that, and as part of their due diligence would recognise that this is the role, is to oversee an entity that will take on.
There's probably 3 different approaches to that, aren't there? That there's lock stock, you take everything, no questions asked. 2, that you do it by an exemptions basis, you take everything except A, B and C, or you list everything that they're taking. and you know, I suppose that's something which is going to Stephen's point, that
different decisions here. I don't think we're talking about like specific fixed asset registers here. I think we're talking about higher level strategic decisions, what we want the new body to be doing and things like that. We want to collaborate on that sort of stuff through the transition period until it's just the board.
But the question was relating to transfer of the assets. So it was, and I guess at what point in the process that, yeah.
And I guess we've got a live example with the short-term discharge solution, right? So we've had a mediation. There's going to be a decision that will come back to all of us to be made. We should be, I would have thought, consulting with the CCO once it's, if it's in place, or that board's in place before we make that decision. Then we make that decision. What happens if they turn around and say, we don't like the decision you made?
Well, they,
Let me just riff on that, because I didn't understand your question. Now all of a sudden it's kind of blowing in my head. If I'm sitting here as a chair of the CCO, I don't want the DAD, and I don't want those what do we call them? The ponds, the rocknation ponds. You keep those, we'll take the rest. That's a sort of a riff on it, right?
Well, you do your due diligence, wouldn't you?
But no, we put the list in there, and then they say, no, we don't want those.
no, I don't actually, I don't know what the legal opinion is, but the entity, in my view, doesn't get to pick and choose. You have established the entity on the basis that they will take all the freeholders' debt and all the freeholders' assets. Otherwise, it defeats the whole purpose.
Yeah.
And then the entity and council are in breach of law, because you've got a CCO here that's doing the freeholders, but you're also doing it over here. So I just don't see that. I understand what you're concerned.
I'm just trying to understand where
Yeah.
our decision-making process through that year, because
But you take some of those things, they might be considered to be obsolete and therefore not part of the water services, and therefore and considered a liability. So, you know, where do they sit?
There's a lot of due diligence that will need to be
Yeah.
done up to the transfer agreement. And I really, by the time we get to the transfer agreement, it won't be 100%, because you never know, you don't know what you don't know. And what we see around the country also is that even after the first year, both council and the entity are discovering, oh, well, that's not quite right, or that wasn't on the register, or that, and that's going to take years to kind of uncover. And we've spoken about that and have a way through. So I don't think it's ever going to be 100% complete.
But the council and the CCO are largely bound by the delivery plan, which has been approved. So anything that varies from that got to go back out for consultation anyway. So anything significant. So and that
but the delivery plan's not super specific
No.
around.
True.
Okay.
but I need to start thinking about specific assets. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Topic, but like the shot over Dartford is a classic example. It's potentially not needed by the CCO.
yeah.
Because then I can build a golf course.
But then there'll be some,
But it's those type of assets that you start to think about to go, okay, is that an asset, that area of land, which is about 70 hectares, for example, is that going across its surplus or not?
Yeah.
And I mean, it's an interesting question. If assets, if decisions are made by the CCO around making different assets obsolete, do the land holdings come back to council?
A whole lot of detail.
Yeah, no,
But yeah.
that's fine. I mean, I guess just two points I would make is, first is that the CCO will have to live with the consequences of your decisions, and it's because of that this made the decision process is required to try and implement
Totally
into that. So
Totally.
they do have to get that. In relation to I guess the detail, you're right, there's a lot of work that needs to be done. But what we will come to in a moment is let's wrap some principles around that. So rather than talking, I guess, down into specific pieces of land, what are the principles that will inform those discussions? At a very high level, what do we think applies? And then that just, most of the time, that gets you 90% of the way there.
Can I just add something to this? I think it's important to remember that this is about operational decisions that we as the council need to make in this transition period. Decisions related to the actual establishment of the CCO, transfer of assets, all of that, different process. So that's the process that sits within Maz's program. There's a whole work stream that will go through the assets and deal with exactly things like you're talking about with the shot over delta, like what happens with the rec ground when it's a stormwater basin and it's a rec ground. And we traversed a lot of that under the previous iteration with the NTU. Yeah. Some things have changed now, like the shot over delta, but I think it's important to focus on the fact that this discussion is about where we are the water services provider between now and the 30th of June 2027. We will have to make operational decisions about delivering water services. This is how we involve the CCO in those decisions. The actual decisions about what goes to the CCO, etc., are a separate process that Maz will be talking to you about as we move through this and feed into the transfer agreement.
All right.
So I think
there's some
all
useful,
of those things you're raising are important, but that's not what this conversation is about.
there's some useful questions there that we're dealing with. Interim decision making, is the summary there? Yep, okay.
So funding commitments. So the established commitments, this is kind of just reiterating where I think that we have already traversed that. So it's just how we're going to work together over the next year. And it is that how council and the board working in good faith, no surprises, there's open communication, collaborative approach, focus on long-term outcomes, support timely establishment and respective governance roles. Yeah, as I said before, this is just kind of a starter. If there's anything that people are particularly keen to see added or taken out, then open to discussion on that. The transfer commitments is not about getting into the detail. This goes to the point I was making. It's not about getting into the detail of what is transparent, but what are the guiding principles that we see as discussions are made. So the right assets and liabilities will transfer, maintain service capability. These are the key things that will guide all decisions as part of those transfer discussions, just locking them down in the governance and the transition governance and support agreement. And key thing obviously will be protecting community and public interests, practical land and access solutions. So just really what we're saying there is if there's a wastewater treatment plant, operational staff must be able to access that. And it may be they have to traverse council lands to get onto it. So what's the actual technical arrangement that's put in place? So it's just really being quite clear as a principle. Operational staff must be able to access critical assets, and then decisions will be quite, one would like to think common sense from there, but you never know. Third party rights is another thing that is obviously quite, that will guide decision making, strong information sharing, and then another thing will obviously be sustainable financial arrangements.
Where do these actually sit though? These commitments, where do they sit? Like, where are they written down? Because, you know, we've obviously have a constitution, we've got a water services plan, and we've got but yeah, I mean, and if you go back to the previous slide, I mean, there's some good things there, you know, the no surprises policies and all that sort of stuff, but yeah, I'm just not sure.
Will there be a document called the transfer agreement?
Is there a transfer?
So the intention, this is just putting forward the current design of this framework, is that these would be in the transitional governance and support agreement. So within the transition agreement, the reason being that that would be signed at quite an early point in time. And the key thing then is when the program team staff go in and sit down with council and they're having discussions with council staff about particular assets and specific things, they've got, particularly with this, also with this one, they've got some parameters in terms of the mandate that elected members have given them for what they need to think about as they have those discussions. Now, they are not decision makers. Obviously, everything will be listed and brought to council for approval, but it's just really giving those who have to get into the detail some guidance as to what they need to think about during that process.
But all of this will culminate in a draft transition for governance agreement that will bring to you in the board.
Anything, Nikki?
No, I'm all good. Thanks.
So council support, so getting into the, I suppose the initial support for that establishment phase. So funding is one of the things that we mentioned before. My understanding is that in the water services delivery plan, up to 8 million of initial funding has been put aside. And what we propose in the agreement is that if there was a need for additional funding, and I'm not saying that there will, I'm just trying to cater for the possibility that it could eventuate. And if there were additional funding required, then it would be something that would be a discussion between the board and council. So that process would be put in there. Agreement is, I understand that all costs will be repaid by the CCO once it can borrow from the LGFA. And as I mentioned before, like the CCO as a new entity, it will need to accede to the LGFA multi-issuer deed, and it will need support from council in relation to that. But I won't get into the detail of that, but just noting that that is one of the milestones as we go through the establishment planning. So with this funding, it will be made available to the board, and the board will be responsible for oversight of that budget, and as the governance entity of the company, ensuring that there's the appropriate controls that we would expect for spending what is essentially public money. And they will be responsible for delegating authority within the CCO through a delegations framework. So as part of the support to MAS, we're working through what does that delegations framework look like, and obviously the appropriate policies and controls that you would want to see in place to ensure that that there are the controls in place and that money is being managed appropriately.
When you say support CCO for the LGFA, do you mean guarantee?
Yes.
Yeah. From council. Of the CCO.
That will be required. That's required by all councils. It's just one of the requirements of LGFA before they would admit the CCO.
Okay.
So in terms of support, and this is getting a little bit into the operational, and I appreciate we've been going for a while, but it really is about what is the support. As I said, the council or the entity is going to be just a shell, with the board sitting at the top, so it's going to need some operational support. And that will be agreed. The specifics of what that is and how it's structured will obviously be agreed at an officer level, but we're talking about staff, systems, secondments, and the support doesn't change the governance of the decision-making authority. And as I said before as well, with that support, the intention would be that would all be captured, and the CCO, once it has access to borrowing, would be in a position to reimburse the council for the costs. So the key messages for today are, you're not being asked to approve this today. We're just asking for feedback, and we've got some really, really good feedback, so thank you for that. And we'll take that on board together with feedback from other sources to shape a version that we think captures all of that. It's a transition agreement. This isn't the end state. This isn't trying to determine what the enduring arrangements will be between the CCO and the board in any shape, or the CCO and council in any shape or form. It's purely about roles decision-making during this transition period, and really trying to support that controlled, transparent transition and protect service continuity and community outcomes. So next steps, I mean, MAS will be leading the charge, but essentially we'll gather the feedback, and then once MAS is happy with the agreement and there's been input from the chair, and obviously from the ELT on the council side, I'm assuming the intention will be to bring an actual copy of the agreement to you, and either workshop that or ask for decision depending on where people are in terms of their thoughts at that point in time.
Cool.
I think that's
Any
me.
questions?
Sorry, messed up.
I think Nikki's got-
Yeah, okay, Nikki.
Really short one, just signalling that I prefer a workshop with the draft worked up than going straight to a council meeting. Thanks.
Thank you.
It's quite complex in a way that we're running lots of things parallel, aren't we? We've got you know, the constitution and the board directors and the, you know, all that sort of stuff, all, yeah, statement expectations and everything. So I get that they're probably not all going to be available at the same time, but we need to sort of keep that in mind how they all interact with each other.
I think this one will be a priority one. As soon as the board are in, it will be one of the first meetings that we want to table with the board. So we'll try to line it up so that we bring a draft to a workshop soon after.
Are we testing our skills as governance?
There's not a lot there.
Question?
Yeah.
I don't think there's an, I don't know if there's an answer to this, so I'm glad Catherine's here. Assumption of debt is 500 million of debt that's going to, plus or minus, that's going to transfer over to the CCO. Is it going to be renamed and, you know, it's going to be Water Services Council of Queenstown, or is it going to be QLDC? And then I guess the other question is, can they get immediate access to LGFA funding, or are they going to be doing it on their own like the airport does? And they're immediately going to have a revenue stream from rates, from mortgage rates. So theoretically, that would offset that 8 million.
So you have to go through a process which is called a session to LGFA to be able to borrow through the LGFA. And that's part of the program that we've got with the finance work stream. So in terms of debt, all the debt transfers and all the assets transferred as per the transfer agreement.
Yeah,
And the establishment costs end up moving across to the CCO also.
yeah, but it's what is it? I mean, literally, what is it named? It will go from being a AA- rated thing to unrated.
They'll have to go and get a rating themselves.
All right,
So it's all in their own name.
all right.
With a guarantee from us to.
But that's established over time, isn't it, with a record, but it will, and obviously your books, review of your books, but what's the likely chance of getting an A plus on day one?
Okay, can we
Yeah.
have a discussion later, because I think it's got a different view. I think we might be all right.
And then just to clarify, the liability literally transfers at midnight on the 30th of June, right? So if we have a cryptosporidium outbreak on the 15th of June, we aren't going to be doing this, right? It's going to be the liability of QLDC, and then
It's all on the board in the CCO on
Okay.
1 July.
all right.
After that day.
27.
Yeah.
27. Yeah.
Oh, well, that's something I haven't seen yet, really. I haven't been paying attention, but the responsibilities for managing a response to a water emergency need to be clarified, because QLDC will still have responsibility for the consequence side, whereas the water entity will have responsibility for managing the problem. And so that will also, and the CEO will have a statutory responsibility of QLDC for that. So that sort of stuff is detailed, but it is governance detail that we need to better understand. That has been the case in the past.
Yeah, and again, I don't want to, get way down in the weeds here and, derail everything, but even if I'm correct, if you have a lawsuit on the 15th of June, that remains with QLDC, that's a trailer, but the CCO doesn't carry that lawsuit, right? It doesn't transfer.
Would it depend?
If the house goes big, can we even get rid of them?
Well, if we take into account some of the storms, I'll use that as an example. Some of the storms around the country have damaged wastewater treatment plants that are transferring across into water services entity this 1 July. So Do they still transfer across? Yes. But what does the council put in train? Council has put in train insurance claims. They put involved all those discussions that you would from a remediation perspective. There's collaboration, obviously, in terms of how that's managed, because again, it comes to that how a different entity is going to deal with the consequences. But the benefit of that insurance claim will then transfer across as well. So it really is just kind of.
I don't think we do. And I think it's, yeah, I don't think when you get,
Well, there must be insurable, they are buildings and structures. and things
There
like
is some
that.
self-insurance, isn't there?
Yeah, if you have a look at the finance committee, last finance committee, there's a whole section on insurances that we have, including catastrophic events. So we have that cover and that will transfer.
on everything, from pipes in the ground through to treatment plants, we've got insurance.
We've got a schedule of assets that we insure.
And it'll be mixed, won't it, Catherine? So there'll be some self-insurance and then there'll be some.
I don't think we insure roads, do we?
Well, in terms of the LGFA lending, will they want to take security over the CCO by way of a GSA?
They don't take security over assets. What they take security over is the revenue stream that transfers across. So they do, and so that's the form of security they have, is the revenue rather than.
Okay, revenue stream, right?
Because they're not so much legislated.
They're not, they're actually prohibited. Sorry.
The revenue stream is protected because it's a.
Yeah, understood.
So it's not like a, you know, the income of a normal company.
Yeah, because what I'm concerned about is the CCO granting security over the assets.
It's not.
It's not allowed at all.
As a matter of legislation, they can't give security as they do. Yeah.
And we've never been asked to borrow against the assets. So I mean, it's on that.
I can just come back to Councillor Mitchell's point about civil defence emergency management. That is an area that we've got to work through with the people organisational work through, because the implications for council currently provides really broad range of expertise and support and skills to sit inside the emergency support centre, and with some of them going to the water service, it will change the balance of those skills and the availability and the opportunity to use them in that way. So that is, and that's sectorally a challenge that all councils are starting to work through at the moment.
I think there's more opportunity and there is challenges in the long run.
And I mean, you know, that there's a bunch of those areas where we're separating things that are integrated. Including, you know, the sports field was mentioned with a number of detention basins that are sports fields. We've got a number of, well, most of our pipes are in roads. Most of our stormwater system is associated with roads. So there's some massive complexity that we're yet to get our heads around.
I think that's your governance, they will let you operation.
Well, but the question is, how do you make a decision? That the governance question is, how do you make a decision around something where the responsibilities are overlapping? So you take the rec grounds there, they go, we need to dig up the entire rec grounds. Well, we have an asset in the corner, but we need to dig up the entire rec grounds to build another storage tank under the rec grounds. How do you make that decision when we've got to go, well, we want continuity of the, you know, the rugby club being able to play there, we know, you know, and there's other things at play. So
there's a well-traversed way to do that we've already worked through when the NTU, we had to do this with the NTU. So we were not that far out from moving into the JD, whatever it was, by the time that reform finished. And this process of identifying all of the assets, including the shared assets, which are the shared use assets, like the examples you're given. We already did a lot of work on that, and the NTU had a framework for working through how you make the decision. So I would expect these guys will pick up the previous work that we did, update it, and there'll be a process by which there'll be good information presented to support whether it should whether it should stay with us or go to the water services CCO. So to the detail of that,
will there be a need to create new, or like actually do some subdivision if you like, so of land. So you either have to create an easement over land to allow for for transfers, or you have to do a subdivision so that there was a local purpose reserve versus recreation reserve. Oh my God.
And then
Some of that was already done.
yes,
We already had, we had a project under the previous one to identify where there were designations that might not work in the future, where there was easements that didn't exist that needed to for land access, like Sinead mentioned earlier. So we actually had a project that we continued to make sure that some of those things were clear. There will probably be more work to do, but that'll be worked through by the
It'll take a couple of years.
and it might not all be right on day one.
And so that act of subdivision, if you like, or call it that, is that council's responsibility or the entities or the water services?
That will be worked through as part of the process.
It's quite
it might be different.
because it's pretty
But it-
costly process.
But it might be different in different circumstances.
Yeah.
So it's not a universal.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's worth pointing out actually there was a lot of work that happened under the previous regime changes
Yeah, I
to
know.
prepare for a move that didn't happen, that is feeding into this work. And that's on the same on the people work streams as well. You know, there is a basis of work that we are updating and working through.
All right. So is that,
Thank you, pleasure.
yeah, cool.
Thank you.
Call the box.
Hmm?
What are you going to call the box?
Right, we can probably start introing without Mike. I think he's only 1 minute away.
Yeah.
Since the discussion last week, we've had a bit of a chat at ELT about the fact that the statement of expectations is probably at the point where it should come back to being kind of led by the QLDC side rather than sitting within the establishment program. So whilst we're working with the establishment program, it's come back to me and my co-collaborator, Megan. Because Megan loves SOEs. To kind of take this forward. So I would just preface this discussion by, that was a kind of discussion we had last week after the workshop we had last week. And whilst we've progressed with the agreed approach last time, which was to bring you a document this time, I would say that that document is a first draft that's been put together by Simpson and Grierson, covering the kind of legal requirements of what we need to have in a statement of expectations. He's pulled in the themes that he heard in the workshop last time, but recognised that this was only sent out last night, which while we indicated last week that it would only go out last night, it means that you haven't had much of a chance to look at it, and neither have we. So this is really just a kind of, what we'll get Mike to do when he joins is he's just going to talk through it, not line by line, but kind of section by section in terms of what the intent of the sections are and the key themes from those sections, linking them back to the conversation you had last time. And then what we'd like to do, and you can give feedback as we go through that process. Then what we'd like to do is we need a little bit of a chance to think about some components. And with my BAU hat on, the strategic growth area is a key area that we need to have a bit of a think about in terms of also looking at how, for example, Hamilton has approached that from a relationship and collaboration and the kind of relationship we want to establish with the CCO. That's another area that I think, based on your feedback last time, we might want to have a think about. And what we would then do is take the feedback from today, feed that into an updated version, give it to you in enough time for you to have been able to have fully absorbed it and thought about it, and then have another workshop in a couple of weeks to then work through it again. So just reiterating, Mike will, now that Mike's here, I'll just make sure I say it when Mike's there. So he knows what I've just told you he's going to do. Not to repeat myself, sorry. Mike will run through the document at a high level, kind of section by section, just pulling out the key themes, particularly linking to the conversations last time. And you can raise as we move through key things you think are missing, where you want us to consider that come up, noting that this is the first draft. Yep. Does that work for everyone? Fabulous. So I will put it up on the screen, Mike, but if I can hand over to you to go through. Is there anything you wanted to raise, Megan?
Well, I think the one thing that I was just going to mention we did talk about is to think about the it's the SOE is one forum or one opportunity to engage with your water services CCO, but it's not the only one. So I think just emphasising that as we work through this, there still needs to be an emphasis on building that relationship, and Maz talked about it earlier, and as did Sinead, and that relationship. We had a bit of a session this morning, and we all agreed it really does come down to a constructive, positive, collaborative working relationship. So as we work through finalising this, there are a number of things you could build in here, but a number of things can actually be achieved through building that relationship. So it's just that reminder, I guess, that this isn't the only opportunity.
What did you say? Rules are for fools.
You wrote that down.
My tutor always told me tools, not rules. So I guess there's always an equivalent based on your degree.
Keep that in mind. Road speed. Tools, not rules.
It is tricky because you haven't got your board in place yet, and you haven't appointed your chair yet. So you can only envisage that we will have a really good, constructive, positive working relationship built on trust.
And I think, we deal with it like standing orders, for instance. The standing orders are there to fall back on, not to rely on. And it's the same sort of thing. The rules are there to protect us. The relationship there is the thing that drives us. It's
Slight digression, but I feel like that with central government sometimes. When it comes to trying to create new rules, and it comes down to relationships with people. Anyway,
Conversation.
Yeah.
All right. So, Mike, do you want to? Shall I hand over to you now? And is this where you want to start, just in the structure of the document?
Yeah, thanks, Penny, and excuse my lateness joining. I think that does sound like quite a sensible approach, and Penny, it might be easier if you just continue to share and we can just work our way down the document. The introduction, I don't think we need to spend time on that one there, but it's just designed to try and frame up the document. The application is effectively what the legislation requires of the SOE, but then the structure, this is coming back to the discussion we had at the workshop last week, which was about the extent to which this SOE could usefully focus in on different periods. And the way we've framed this, because we took we heard from the room that we could see some benefit on having a set of establishment expectations and then transitional expectations. We suspect that there's still some work to be done to perfect these, and we'll be interested in some direction that we can get from this room. But we've broken it down into these 4 categories. In actual fact, there's probably not a lot of difference between the general expectations and the enduring, because they will be eventually the expectations that will apply. But we've framed the document so that there are some establishment specific ones and then transitional expectations as well, which apply at different phases. The establishment ones seem to be quite important because we heard from some of the feedback that they wanted to see a seamless delivery of water services, and that obviously means that through the establishment and then the transition, there needs to be a close degree of working together as part of that council versus company family, and ensuring that water services are going to be provided on a steady, safe and resilient basis. So I think that's how we've framed up the structure, and you'll see that as we drift down the page further. So Penny, do you want to take us on?
Just a quick question, Mike. Obviously, the Local Government Water Services Act has a bunch of defined terms. Can we assume that you've used the correct terminology? You've used those as defined terms in the Act?
Yeah, well, the term establish is used in the legislation, but there's no, in fact, definition of what establish means. Our interpretation of that is that once you incorporate, and definitely when you've got a board, you've got a company that's functioning, and so it's established. But the transition, it's not defined either. We've been talking about the transition period as being from the date that the transfer happens through to when it's properly developing its second water service strategy. We think there's good logic that that's a transitional period.
That sounds logical. I suppose the point is that if we're using terms that are either poorly defined or not defined in the Water Services Act, we probably should define them at the bottom of the document.
Well, I think this is just on that point.
Clarifies.
No, just on this point, Councillor Smith, this is why we've tried to describe it here with reference to particular dates. Yep. So that it's more about the period than what the term might actually mean.
Yeah. Okay. All right, thank you.
Yeah, and you can see at the bottom there, that sentence underneath just reflects that these periods are considered important to provide some guidance on how the organisation will mature over time and achieve the goals that the council is wanting to see delivered. So then we come down to the general expectations. Now, as we mentioned last time round, the legislation requires a statement of expectations to set out the outcomes that are expected to be achieved by providing water services. Now, that's fairly loose, opaque wording, but what we've decided here is to capture some of the key outcomes to be achieved. Now, these outcomes are given further meaning as you work through the document, but as a single place that you can review in an SOE, interested in whether or not this could be considered quite helpful. So that we're thinking here about the fact this document's going to be made publicly available. Residents, consumers, others will be able to see this document and understand in a quick snapshot what it is that the council will expect QLDC 3 Waters to deliver. And these are general statements, but again, given meaning later on. So this is, as Penny said, a working list that takes from some of the points we talked about at the workshop last week. But you can see the general signals there: a compliant delivery model, financially sustainable, consideration given to affordability, and then supporting population growth and working in tandem with the council's own strategic growth objectives. And then, of course, cost of growth recovered from developers. Now, anticipate that there's going to be some further thinking done on that particular outcome. And then looking down, those are the outcomes. We've then got, in delivering, a focus on how the company should be undertaking its business. And you can see there, we heard last week that it was important for the company to be open, transparent, and even proactively disclosing matters, so that both the council and the public understand key issues that will impact on delivery and environmental and public health. And we've got those other more general requirements or expectations that are likely to be an expectation. I'll just pause there. Nikki, I see you've got your hand up with a question.
Thank you. Yeah.
I think your structure is really good. Just detail, right? So, I mean, for me, I'd like, what I'm concerned about is this: maintain its intended independence. I think that could be phrased differently so that it doesn't look like there is a reason to discard, councillor direction. I don't know, the wording just seems a bit loose. There's obviously a bunch of things to put into the section around other high-level expectations, but don't need to get into those now, I guess. And I'd just like some sort of statement in the general expectations around QLDC 3 Waters sort of must comply with all expectations in this SOE, unless compliance would be unlawful. So just some more direction that ensures that we are still in control. It just feels a little bit loose. Yeah, and look, I've got a bunch of other stuff, but it probably sits elsewhere.
Okay. My question is a little bit like Nikki's, and that is environmental outcomes, ecological outcomes. Is this a cookbook that comes from the Three Waters legislation, or if we are constructing this, I don't see any reference to that unless it's item E and F, which is a reference to Manawhanu and the treaty.
I'm sorry, I wasn't on the same page as you. So you're looking at E and F in particular.
Yeah, well, you
Sorry, this
Yeah,
is
so-
this is not dictated by the legislation. Some of these are restating things that are legislatively required, so they're technically not required to be stated in here because they're required by the legislation or the economic regulation. But this is where we can include outcomes that we want the entity to be working towards, but they can't be in conflict with the legislative and
I
economic
can guarantee
regulation.
you, if we put this document out to the electorate out there, they're gonna wanna know where the where we are targeting environmental outcomes that are sustainable or that we will attempt to, that's aspirational. They will be looking for that.
Yes, and we've
Agreed.
reflected that elsewhere as well. So this is where there's still some
somewhere else.
drafting to be done. Just in terms of the appropriate expectations regarding tutility, the key legislative requirement is that if there are any treaty settlement obligations that are relevant, they, the company, in performing and exercising functions under this Act, must act in a manner that's consistent with those. The legislation also says or expects that where there are contracts that are directly related to the provision of water services, that the company will need to rely on, they could either transfer or be novated in part, so that the company picks up those obligations that currently sit with the council. But in terms of any other contracts, agreements or arrangements that the council may have with Māori third parties, so iwi mana whenua, there is work to be done to understand what those agreements or relationships mean and whether or not they could be applied to the company and to some extent. And so on that point, I don't think there is an immediate expectation or requirement that any of these other arrangements transfer. There is more work to be done to allow the company to develop those relationships in a way that's relevant to its business. But here's the place for setting expectations as to how the company should conduct itself with your mana whenua partners or stakeholders. And I think we've just highlighted this in yellow because where we'd parked things with the constitution conversation is that there were still conversations to happen with Karunaka about the extent to which iwi would be involved in informing the company's business.
So I picked up your point though, Q, that this outcomes section is where we should be saying something in terms of environmental outcomes. What the something is, I think we need to think about.
Yeah, and whether or not we define that mathematically or it's just a statement of aspirations.
Yeah.
A statement of aspirations, I believe, should include that
Yeah.
we will endeavor, we will aspire to to the least possible discharge possible into the largest river in the South Island. Because if we don't do that, then I can guarantee you there are going to be thousands of people out there going to jump on those phrases. And it's going to make.
I mean, we have through the QLDC when we did put expectations on around emissions, climate emissions, and things like that. I don't think this is out of line with, if you want specific outcomes, we should be able to.
Yeah, I think we can pick that up.
Yeah, we can pick that up and come back
too
some-
prescriptive.
Yeah, we can come back with some thinking on that. But in terms of being as specific as that, that might not be.
That's what I just said.
Yeah.
I'm sure you can wordsmith it.
Yeah.
But
The treaty one's interesting too, given the issues, obviously, of Project Shotover and the current happenings. So we need to, I suppose, engage with iwi and develop something that's meaningful in the language here to,
So it's on that. I feel like we were waiting to hear back as to how they wanted to be involved in engagement, like, are we still just waiting on that? Because I guess that also would then, we need to reflect that
Yes,
in this, whatever that might be.
yeah, we're still waiting to hear back from Renata with regards to how they want to engage on the CCO in general.
Okay.
So yeah, we're not anticipating that until June at the earliest, I think. So you may want to.
And when do we sign this off?
When do we sign this off?
probably about then. So I think what we talked about, this is going to be similar as the Constitution, where the statement of expectations will probably set a high level expectation about the type of relationship and engagement we want the CCO to have with Runaka, which may reflect the fact that we want it to be in part Runaka-led, perhaps. We wouldn't dictate the nature of that relationship. The statement of expectation just sets the fact that we would expect them to develop a collegial relationship that's based on those collaborative principles, and that it is done together or alongside us. So we're not doing two different things.
Yeah, I think the key to this is getting it at the right altitude in terms of enabling and guiding without being super prescriptive, because you might not be able to be, particularly with regards to EV. Well, equally though, in that emissions reduction side of things, you know, our water services are one of our large emitters. And wastewater treatment
plants. In terms of embedded carbon and everything.
Yeah. So you think carefully through that as well, because whilst we will be relinquishing some of our own carbon emissions in that transfer, it's a big area. Yeah.
So the emissions one, sorry, just to close that out, that is in here, and I just rather than talk about that again, that's something we need to put some more thought into before the next version comes back, to make sure that whatever expectation we set from that isn't at odds with the financial sustainability or cost effectiveness. So we'll come back with options for that.
I suppose, as we've discussed before, some of these things are informed by other policies and other directions, and the climate biodiversity plan, for instance, is one of those, and really understanding which policies we can use, say just adhere to this policy, and then that solves the problem, but then others we've been told we can't inform through policies.
Or in the legislation that relates to 3 waters, so, you know, as you said, we've got a series of wastewater environmental performance standards, and then the legislation that requires the most cost-effective solution. Those are primarily set up for these entities to operate under. So we can't set a statement of expectations that demands them to do something beyond those.
Well, given that hang on, Nick. Given that you know, the most cost-effective is not yet hasn't yet been fully defined, but that in section paragraphs 11 onwards talks about the role of the other, like the planning documents and strategies are included by reference here essentially. So what we're talking about here is in further up, maybe even under paragraph 1, we're talking about compliance with environmental, public health and regulatory requirements is relatively high level, but not defined. Is that government requirements, or is it what we have in our other policies, which have an environmental or social or cultural set of objectives to them? So there's a gap here, I think, that to be consistent, we probably need something, maybe it's another section, that refers to all of this, and maybe I missed it, maybe it's later, but that draws all of those environmental and other things in, which we expect them to be delivering to.
Well, no doubt. I suppose the first version is always going to be a little bit higher level, and as time goes by, we'll evolve
through suggestions.
To attack the cost argument, and you know, again, this is going to get high level GDP, whatever, but a reference to the centrality of clean water to tourism might be put into the statement of expectations, because purely relying on a simplistic cheapness of rates doesn't recognize the effect of clean water on tourism.
It has a legal definition of what's called clean water.
Exactly. Which is why
that might be visited shortly. I think you highlighted brilliantly there's a need to be threaded here between the legislation, its requirements, and the extent to which you want to help shape their culture and the way that they work. So I think that's exactly the step we're going to take back. We want to include as many of our good policy influences as we can, and understand where the fishhooks actually sit, where there's intentions.
Yeah, and what we will try to do in the next iteration is show the things where we think our policies and our strategies, for the most part, should and can influence their direction versus the ones that may be at odds with the regulatory and legislative framework. So, for example, the spatial plan is actually built into the legislative requirements, around around this in terms of the fact that the water services entity is required to deliver on urban development and growth outcomes of the districts, and there's a whole section of the statement of expectations that has mandatory requirements for us to give direction to them on that. So that's quite a different situation than water quality.
We distinguish whether they
Can I-
mandate to provide infrastructure for the fast tracks.
Yeah,
that again, that's covered. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think we probably need to put a bit more thought into that as we start to, mature our own approach to fast tracks. But yes.
But it'd be good
Okay, yeah.
if Mike, can you just clarify by 1A compliance with all, is that in reference to central government, or did you look more widely?
I think that was intended to be a broad brush capture to all, because when we're talking about regulation in a water context, we know that the ComCom is going to play a role in terms of the economic reg and even the potential performance delivery. Public health will be the water authority, and then environmental regulation is still going to be largely the regional council in terms of any discharge or any take, but in terms of land use, that will be the council. And so the expectation there is you continue to comply with all of your existing obligations under district regional plans and your consents. So that was what we were intending to mean in that one, but we can of course draw out further what you would expect in this document.
So that one is talking about statutory and regulatory requirements.
Okay, so Nikki, your turn.
Thanks. Yeah, look, it's just going back a few steps, but just where it comes to talking about the environment, we're talking about these clauses that don't allow us to potentially protect the environment to the extent that we want to. I wouldn't want to place our legal interpretation into this document. I think we should be setting out what we want, subject to, any legal requirements. And the CCO can figure that out itself rather than us trying to limit what we put in here based on varyingly different interpretations of different acts. Would that be an okay approach, Mike?
Yeah, if you were to do that, just conscious that you're going into it knowing that if anything you put in this SOE is going above what the regulatory standards or requirements are, then they will prevail.
Yes, exactly.
So
well, they always would, wouldn't they?
Yes, they will. So, I mean, that's the only fish hook there, is that if you do set this expectation that is at a higher standard, when you know that the regulation exists, you're potentially leaving some room for uncertainty to arise.
Well, I think we're being non-specific, aren't we? What we're doing, what I'm suggesting is that, for various different things, wastewater has a set of standards, stormwater maybe not, that may change over time, laws change. So what we're doing is setting something enduring where we have an expectation that they will do what they can to the extent that they can to protect our environment. Where they can't, the law will, and look, I'm going to get my one other thing in before I lose my chance. The other thing we haven't got in there is pricing needs to be stable and predictable. So in terms of an enduring, something that needs to be carried across, we're having issues at the moment with price spikes and so on. If we could put something in our general expectations that pricing will be smooth to the extent that it can and will be predictable for customers, that would be great. Thank you.
I mean, going back to the whole establishment, we're sort of that it's assumed that they're going to be unaffordable and unpredictable. So, and unfortunately, that's the reality of the situation, and even worse, some of it. But anyway,
so we'll come back with some options on what Nikki just raised and with what Q talked about.
The presumably this still results in an SOI, which is their risk. No, it's
the SOE, and it informs the water services strategy.
Yeah, the strategy, right?
3 years. The water services strategy is the same as the LTP. It has a 10-year horizon, but it's redone every 3 years.
So the SOE would be redone every 3 years?
Yeah.
I'm just recalling that, and they have to give effect to the SOE.
They have to give effect to the SOE in their water services strategy. And then they are regulated to confirm that the water services strategy does address the SOE, and then the regulatory environment, the regulatory regime monitors that they deliver to the water services strategy.
So in that other model, we get a little bit more certainty through the SOI as being the response to the SOE. Apart from the water services plan, we don't really get that benefit here. We don't have them saying this is how we're going to deliver on the environmental and climate change outcomes, for instance.
No, it's the same. So you see the water services strategy. In the water services strategy, they have to say how they're responding to these outcomes. It's one of the requirements of the water services strategy. And you see it and comment on the water services strategy, similar to how you do with the statement of intent.
All right.
I wonder if I might
Right, so
just,
go to the next section.
well, I think this is, if we go down to paragraph 14, this is where, just picking up on what Quentin was saying there, this section talks about preparing their accountability documents and policies. And so these are some expectations that will apply when the company is going through its significance and engagement policy and then preparing its WSS. Now, 15 picks up on the conversation we had 2 workshops back around the role that the council wants to have in reviewing the draft water service strategy. But just on your point, Quentin, there about how you will appreciate what has been done to give effect to these expectations, you could potentially set an expectation here that when preparing the draft, the company prepares a checklist which brings out these expectations and identifies how in the strategy they have been given effect to, so that you've got that running list or record of what they've done in terms of running this exercise. And look, I say this because this is already being done by some of the other water organisations. They've when developing their WSS, they've had a separate document that says, well, here's what this document needs to do, and here's how we are going to do it. And they've flagged the pages or the sections in the WSS that align with what the shareholders are expecting. And so it's a good accountability tool.
Mike, do you think that as a workshop setting? That because this wouldn't come to council for approval?
You mean you mean that document or the WSS?
What
Sorry,
we've referred to in 15 is that council would have a chance to comment.
Yeah, that paragraph was talking about the timing by which the company will provide the draft WSS to the council. So you've got the opportunity today to say, while the statutory minimum is that you need to give it to us by no later than 1 March, we think there is good reason why you should work to give it to us sooner, so that we can have a better opportunity to line up our infrastructure strategy with your WSS. Or in fact, if you think you need to have a direct opportunity to engage, we can fit that into both parties' timeframes.
So I suppose the timing of this is going to be an interesting question because, yeah, well, there's a couple of back and forths here, and we need to provide input and vice versa. So how long are they going to need for,
So this is one of the areas we need to do some more thinking on, and actually the Hamilton and Waikato statement of expectations has a slightly different approach to this, which is a more integrated planning approach, which given the extent of growth in our district and the extent of integration we need between our planning and the water planning, it needs to be
suggesting a co-design of the statement of expectation effectively.
No, I'm talking about the water services strategy.
Yeah, well, that's what I was trying to work out when,
So the timing, so the original,
this goes back to that tone. So, well, what's the relationship?
Yes.
Because, we want to be.
Yep. So we'll come back with some different options for how those two can work together. This is
we're better off having a water services plan, that strategy that
yes,
we've been agreed to.
So this is at one extreme end. If you put the 1st of February in here, for example, that's basically we've done all of our planning by that point, and then they give us their water services strategy, and then you comment on it. That's not actually going to get us good outcomes. And so what we need to put some thought into and what we'll bring back is an approach where the expectation is more of an integrated process. But that'll probably be at an officer level. The governance level is slightly different. So this is an area where we need to come back with some different options.
But unlike the other the SOI approach, we don't get a second bite at it. Our formal role stops at the SOE. So we're reliant on.
No, you
No.
review and comment
And
on the
approve
water
the water
services.
services.
No, you don't approve it. You guys
Well,
agree.
but that's my point. Our formal influence stops at the SOE. So we're reliant on a relationship to inform the water services strategy.
No, the Constitution embeds that they have to provide, that they will provide you with the water services strategy. You'll be given the opportunity to comment, and then they will consider your comments.
Yeah.
And there is an
Which I think
escalation path in the Constitution that enables, I think, requirements as well, that you want it as a fallback.
So confirms exactly what I said.
Yeah, what we're talking about is that, we'll be at a point where we will have robust information. They will be at a point where they actually will want the information to inform the strategy.
Yeah.
So
we don't then come back and approve the strategies that we have to rely on. At that point, we have to rely on the relationship and them taking on board our feedback and adopting it in their.
Well, more than that, I mean, they'll want to have
They want to have us on board, but yeah.
I think,
So, Mike, can you clarify what the constitutional requirement was they landed on?
yeah, sure. So I think what we'll do, Penny, as well, is while I'm explaining that, let's jump back up to section 3 in this document, because I think that's helpful to frame the working relationship as well. But just picking up on the WSS, where we have landed in the draft constitution is that there will be a requirement for the company to provide the draft to the council. The council then has the ability to review and provide comments direct to the company, and the council has reserved itself the ability to request or require amendments in appropriate cases, and the company will have to consider a request or a requirement and then have the engagement with the council at that point on whether or not it agrees or not. And the Constitution has also built into it a dispute type process where if the council was to require and the company didn't agree, there would need to be a working together to iron out that issue before the document can be finalised and approved by the company.
Thank you. That's useful, Mike.
Yes, a
Yeah.
bit more.
So it's a formalisation of there's some formalisation of that relationship in saying how do we want to get to the same point. Yeah. But still, the final decision clearly still sits around the water services strategy, still sits with them. So
that's correct. And so
yeah, but it has to and yeah.
And so what I thought would be useful now is to just note that 1415 are specific to the key accountability documents, but we've also included in here some of the general expectations around how the company should work with the council. And this is based on some of the feedback we heard last time round, where you want for this company to be supportive of the council's role and vice versa. And so we've mapped out there and for a number of aspects which we think are sensible expectations about how the company will work with the council, including regular engagement between the board and the council, meetings between CEs, other officers and staff to be arranged as they see fit. And then we've got their early engagement on key initiatives, no surprises policy, and then advance notice on any significant departures or other key decisions that will be of material importance to council. So I think this is where we'd sort of framed up the general expectations, but then there's a place in this document for more specific expectations on, for example, the water service strategy, which we've just talked about. So we're happy to take some guidance on this content.
If you think about it, I was just recalling, I mean, with the CCTO, you actually don't adopt the SOI. The QAC, the board adopts the SOI. You agree it, or you seek for them to moderate it. So it's the same in that regard.
We did formally agree that in the council meeting though, which was it doesn't appear that will be the same in this case.
Yeah, that's true.
So that was my point, is it's slightly different, is we actually formally agreed that every year.
That's why I mean,
well, I think the way this plays out in terms of
It'll
the
be
actual
close.
steps you take through workshops and meetings, etc., is yet to be determined.
Yeah.
The mechanism in the Constitution in here is just to highlight that there should be a collaborative relationship that precedes being, presented with a formal anything, and that there is a process for you to consider it, to provide feedback, and to be directive if necessary. And
once again, the regularity of the meetings is actually less important than just saying the relationship should be really good. If it's not, if you're not meeting these minimum baselines, we don't think that's right. So yeah, that can adjust as time goes by.
You need this open enough to be able to define how that process will work in any given era or situation. Hopefully the relationship will be high and you have high trust and you shape it in that space. But equally, you want to have this ability, if there's a low point, to put in place a slightly different process under those same principles.
I've got a couple of questions or thoughts on paragraph 4. It feels to me that both D and E should almost be and vice versa, but I don't know whether this is the document that, because like for example for D, that just puts an emphasis on the CCO engaging with us.
Yes, right.
Should we also be saying the other way around? Question for the group. And my second point on this one is, and Nick, you would like me saying this, is this somewhere where we might put some constraints around the CCO entering into long-term contracts without our consent or needing our approval or something like that? I don't know whether that's the right place, or whether that should be in the Constitution or where that needs to sit, but
they would have to be spelled out in a strategy. If you were going to enter into a long-term contract, you'd have to be within the scope of the strategy, wouldn't you? You would think. So maybe we create an expectation that those things are reported in the strategy.
It sort of goes back to that sort of major transactions or major things that they might do that we, the shareholder, might want to have some oversight of.
Okay.
I just wonder whether this is the place.
It's a good question.
When you set it out and say along the lines of major transactions, whatever they might be defined, you need to talk to them.
So major transactions in terms of decisions that the entity might make for investment, including the contracts that support them, are the things that are the decision of the entity. And if Mike can correct me if I'm wrong here, that's if there is direction given from council, that's where the financial independence starts getting called into question. So I would have thought, Mike, that we wouldn't put in the statement of expectations an expectation around major transactions or long-term contracts involving us as part of the decision making, although we might be notified of them.
We can absolutely do this. This is an option.
That's a question for you.
I think we need to understand exactly what it is the council's wanting to provide direction on, but I just want to unfortunately go back to 14 because we talked about this as well. The role of the significance and engagement policy is going to be quite important, particularly on that contract length, because it will need to set out criteria and matters that will determine whether or not a contract is significant or not. If it is, it'll have to be the subject of specific consultation. So that 14 has been framed to ensure that the council is closely involved in that first SEP exercise, and that might be an opportunity to build into it some of the contracting concerns that we've heard. On the major transactions or investment decisions, there's already some reference in this document to key decisions or strategic proposals, but we could put a little bit more description on what they might be. I think the question is where you want to take that, because if there is in fact a desire for the council to be involved as the effective decision maker, then I think that's where Penny's concern around losing that financial independence could become a bit more real. So we'll
I don't know whether it's necessarily about making the decision for them, but that a 30-year contract is a significant, that'll be in place long after all the board and the chair and the chief executive have left, and we'll be left with whatever the consequences of that are. So I suppose it's just being aware of those things. Equally, there's some strategic reasons why, would a contract like that inhibit, going into joint services with a different council or something like that as well. So, you know, there's some strategic questions we need to work out. But Nikki,
on that joint arrangement point, that's also, and sorry, I know Nikki, you've got a question here as well, a comment. That joint arrangement and significant contract point is what is signalled in the legislation as though these are quite key to strategic decisions that would usually warrant public consultation. And so there is that issue as well to sort of fall back on. I know that's not providing all the answers that you might want right now, but the legislation is geared to recognise that there will be a different category of decision that will require public engagement by the company before the decision can be made.
Sorry,
That's that's consultation with the community, right?
Yeah, this is different. Thank you. There's different things here, and I think we can approach this. And thanks, Stephen, for raising it. I am happy. We can either do something like, you know, we need to sign off on contracts of a certain term or of a certain amount. And that's absolutely something that we are able to do. I mean, we shouldn't be pushed away from that. We just need to understand what the pros and the cons are. But the other way of doing it is just saying, you know, you can't enter into contracts exceeding a certain amount. And then we've made the decision up front, but it doesn't then take us into that territory where we're financially managing anything. So I think please take the intent and then find different ways to do it that might have different outcomes in terms of, you know, whether we're financially controlling or whether we're not. The intent is there that, you know, we don't want them entering into long contracts or very expensive contracts without limits. It's not a limitless thing. It's too risky for us. So there must be a way to do it. We've talked about it over multiple workshops. So it would be great to see some energy invested in how we could do it, not how we can't do it.
The points noted, we're going to have to find a balance there, but yeah.
I think this was raised last time, and we said we would get advice on it, which I don't think we've got, so I'll do that next session.
Thanks,
Penny.
Did you have something, Cody?
Yeah, I had a question. Might divulge from this. I was just looking, a lot of the regions, Auckland, Waikato, Selwyn, Northland are all 2 waters, and we're 3 waters. And so I think a lot of it's really easy to separate fresh and wastewater, but stormwater is obviously integrated with planning. It seems that only Wellington's really doing that. I'd say that's sort of the awkward integration. How do we see, is there a North Star to follow in terms of best practice of stormwater management integrating with land use planning? Or is that a tricky one to navigate?
That is something that needs some more fleshing out in this agreement for exactly that reason. So that and land use planning generally and growth management, we need to do some work on a more integrated approach to that, because you're right. The stormwater management and the broader land use are more integrated than the others, the other 2 waters. So
is there?
It's a good point. We haven't.
Right. Okay.
It's one of the things we need to do some more work on.
Right. Cool.
Again, we wouldn't put the detail in here. What is really important is that those 2 parts of the organisation, the CCO and our organisation, are set up to be able to work in a really integrated way.
Yeah.
So there's key parts of QLDC that after the CCO is established are going to need to not just talk to each other and have regular meetings, but actually operate in a more integrated way.
Yeah, I think, like, I remember bringing it up previously and sort of talking anecdotally, but I don't remember having like a full conversation, given that people are, you know, separating those quite commonly because of the nuance there in terms of how we do it, and given that, you know, there's a lot of community input and expertise around stormwater management, that it could be, you know, like a focus given the district's ambitions around lakes and rivers.
Agreed. Great, Cody. Thanks.
Thanks.
So section 7 or paragraph 17, where those other plans, strategies, etc. that we talked about earlier come, and feeling for me is that they come too late. Those sort of values that Julie was talking about earlier, they're here, which is great. I suspect they might be, I did listen. But yeah, it's got to be something at the start that links back to those, I think.
And I think, Cody, actually the blue-green network plan is one of the places where that comes together, which I think you're having a conversation about. Yeah. So that I think is a key, that's a key place for stormwater management and broader environmental use of green spaces, land, biodiversity all kind of comes together. And so that's a plan that one and done, once you sign it off, that's the thing that we need to continue to maintain as QLDC, and that the CCO will have to be a core partner in the future, as opposed to just being able to talk to ourselves about the stormwater components. Well, and
yeah.
It's a really important comment though, and I'm just thinking this is very much, it's just foundational, it's very much based on legality, etc., etc. But there is a hearts and mind piece here that we are very unique in terms of our aspirations for our landscapes and our rivers and lakes. So it's just something we can think about upfront, establishing that.
I'm just conscious of time. We're scheduled to finish shortly, but what's the best use of the remaining time, if any?
Anything else you want to perhaps spot?
I wonder whether we just work through it, Penny, and identify the areas where some particular focus is in fact needed. So we've tried to bring through. I see there's a couple of hands up. Oh, one of those are mine. Oops, I'll take that down.
Who's talking? Oh wait, that's me.
Teams. I'm not a Teams rookie as well. That was a bit embarrassing. Sorry. But the if we work through this 6, 7 through 10 is looking at the relationships separate from council, but with the community and other key stakeholders. It'd be interesting to see if we've captured the general feeling on what that should appropriately say. As we've just talked about, the land use and urban growth related alignment is really important. And to take Penny's point further, stormwater absolutely needs to be addressed. One other area which I think we need to reference in this document is how we want to treat water services bylaws. So I'd probably expect there to be some content on that front to make sure that if the council is to continue, well, the council will continue to have the role in making any amendments to bylaws or even making new, but the experience in terms of administering those bylaws that the company might be delegated will be really important to inform that exercise. So that's an area of some focus. We've then been through 14 and so on already.
Sorry, Mike, can I just ask a question or go back to paragraphs 11 and 12, which are around facilitating
alignment.
Facilitating and supporting growth. I'm just concerned that word support growth almost gives them mandate to enable growth, whereas I feel that's
responding to growth.
It's our council's job to decide on growth, and they respond to that, not support. What I'm trying to get to is I don't want developers to think that the CCO's job is to support them to grow.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, we talked about that last time.
Yeah.
So I just wonder whether that's is it a separate clause that sort of says that, or is it just
that's
you know what I mean?
I understand what you're saying there. I think in 11 we've tried to reflect there that it's the council's own strategic growth and infrastructure plans, but I see what you mean. 12A, the supporting growth comment could create this perception that the water company is also tasked with the policy function in terms of describing where growth should happen. That wasn't what we'd intended, but there's a bit of finessing that can be done there to close that gap. Because I understand what the concern is, that you don't want developers looking to just lean on the water company to extract promises around growth to then come back to the council, because that's the tail wagging the dog scenario again. We need to make it quite clear in this document that the council retains the regulatory or planning function around strategic growth, and you're wanting the water company to work with those plans.
So this is an area where we'll come back with something that's probably more based on what they did for Hamilton. So for, just as an example, they specifically say that the councils expect the CCO to, one of the outcomes, a stable and secure long-term decision-making environment that makes sound investment decisions for very long-life infrastructure in accordance with the future development strategy, which belongs to the council. The capital and growth program is aligned with council's capital and growth program in accordance with the future development strategy. Do not invest where the councils are not planning for growth and supply.
Right.
So it's a lot more integrated.
There's a couple of risks there though, because the FDS isn't just ours either. So it's not just us, because remember it's the CE, it's right down to Dunedin, in fact. It's a regional spatial plan, and it's the ORC at the table on that as well. So that's one area where.
Yeah, so sorry, the FDS is using different language. There won't be an FDS in the future anyway, but we'll bring back something that's appropriate for us, that's based on.
The other, the signal before is that we putting an expectation on them that they service zoned areas for growth is literally impossible, because we have 4 times as much zoned area as we need under any projections or whatever it is. It's we're over zoned by a significant amount. So we've got to be careful about what actually you're responding to, because rezoning isn't something we can respond to immediately, but if someone's going to cut dirt in 12 months time, then we can look at responding to that.
Agreed. Yeah, so this won't say you will service all zoned areas. I can assure you. Yeah. But I was just using that to illustrate that others thought about this.
So paragraph 11, the second sentence is probably okay, but the first one's not. That's where the problem is. It's talking about aligning.
It sounds like we're on the right track. We just need to tighten up the language here. And so that's helpful. Thank you all. And then moving along, we mentioned this at the workshop last time round, but the information for the half-yearly report, we've set out a potential list there, but interested in views on that from the group. So I don't think we need to talk about it in too much detail now, conscious of timing. And then the other section is the establishment expectations. Now, this is where from the period 1 July through to 30 June, which is just before they will accept transfer, we're wanting them to be focused on doing certain things well. And so, I mean, this is hopefully going to be addressed by the transition agreement that you develop as well. But this is sort of capturing the general message that they need to be establishing that robust governance model that's going to enable long-term success. This was something that was picked up last time, providing opportunities for the council to have input into recruitment of a CE. That comes through in 20E. And then the direction is to adopt the water service strategy that is based on the council's WSDP. So it's not a complete reinventing of the wheel, but potentially there's an opportunity there to feed in other expectations that link back to the other content in this SOE. So I thought I'd just take you through that proposal because it's specific to that phase. The transitional expectations, I suspect mostly you'll see those building off the establishment expectations and continue to develop and embed that robust model. But we've left that relatively open-ended at this stage to get some guidance from you. There will also be some other decisions that will need to be made around the approach to development contributions over the next 18 months. Now, that will also will require the council and the company to agree whether or not you're going to have an initial DC policy, which effectively cuts and pastes from the council's own policy, or you'll be directing the company to develop something new, which is going to be obviously more process cost and time. I expect that you'll probably want to go with that latter to ensure that the DC policy for water is as fit for purpose as possible. So that's the sort of other transitional expectation that you might look to set.
And I see that the
question around recovery of DCs too, degrading the policy, who recovers them costs, the DCs themselves?
So that's part of the work that the establishment team will do in terms of which things we do for them over a period. Probably it'll be us to start with for everything. We'll probably be sending out the bills, we'll probably be collecting the DCs, and certainly on day one, there'll be a bunch of services we're doing on their behalf in that space.
There's a couple of things that jump out at me. One is that, what do you really mean by establish a robust governance model? I mean, isn't that actually determined by the Constitution and the legislation anyway? I mean, the governance model, can they actually, yeah, anyway, we're asking them to establish a governance. We're the governance. It's up to us to establish the governance, not the other way around. So just was confused with that. And the other, yeah, just where we landed with the chief executive stuff, as to whether we embedded some sort of veto or something in the, or where we landed with that.
What I was just going to say was that they will establish their own governance to a degree as well. I mean, you're going to establish who's on that table, but the actual model that they then run within their organisation will be for the board to define.
Yeah,
I think that's what that's coming to. You are.
That's right. What I was meaning by that is that, as I think we've mentioned this to you previously, the legislation is predicated on open, transparent operations. These water organisations, so this company will be subject to the same meeting requirements as you are under Lagoima. And so when I say robust governance model, what I'm meaning there is you want to see the company developing a sensible, prudent approach to preparing agendas, its reporting and its board meetings, so that they are satisfying all of the same requirements that Lagoima puts on you as well. And this has been a point of difficulty actually for a lot of the new directors of these water organisations who haven't had any hands-on experience with Lagoima. Actually coming to terms with everything being done publicly is a bit of a sea change. And so there's a period where you need to get the ball rolling to ensure that you are doing things the way the shareholder will be used to and expect you to.
Okay, so I'm conscious we're going to have to wrap up really. We're sort of out of time, but what are the next steps in terms of, like, is there another opportunity to provide any feedback on this, or do you want there is? Okay.
Yeah. Should I just tag in very quickly? There's some question around the CM and veto piece. In line with your comments around relationship building with the board, I would strongly urge that's a conversation with you and the board chair before you make any calls on that, because it would be exceptional to go with a model whereby we were putting parameters on the board around OCE. That's a highly unusual thing to do. So I think in terms of that relationship aspect, I think that's probably worth a further conversation before you land on it.
I think we will get advice on whether it is possible at all anyway, because we thought that was something that was a decision that had to be made by the board. But we'll get some advice on that for the next session.
As I said, it's a big risk for us as well, managing, you know,
That's the relationship.
Yeah, I know.
And you would anticipate that the chair would have a conversation with the mayor, for example. That doesn't need to be, that's what the comment I made much earlier, but it doesn't need to be prescribed by this. And actually, as Michelle said, it sends a really, frankly, a bad message to anyone who might be looking at applying to become a chief executive of this organisation, because the board is the employer of the chief executive.
Yeah. But you know, once again, going back to this, it's still a big risk for us, and we need to be the first port of call is to manage it through relationships with the Water Services CCO.
And appointing an excellent board.
And appointing an excellent board, but
and I would have thought if the board
boards come and go as well, they're stuck with the.
But if the board heard from the mayor that there is an express issue with an individual that they were considering to appoint as chief executive, they would have grave concerns about that, of course.
Yeah. Well, but only if they're required to tell us who they're talking about appointing, which they're not.
Well, so, but this requirement of giving the opportunity to have involvement in,
Yeah.
essentially sets the framework for a discussion to occur about that and how.
But that's just right, exactly.
And I think the
That
concern
they're
has
not
been
required
raised.
to come to us.
I mean, if I were applying for a chief executive role for this board, I would be having a look at these workshops, which are all online, and I would, and certainly that sentiment has been made clear.
All right, I'll get with that. We'll follow that up anyway. All right, is there anything else we need to close out on? You just.
So just the next steps to your question, so at the moment, I think the next workshop in relation to anything CCO related isn't until June, but we'll put in an additional workshop to come back with this. I'll check in with Maz if there's anything else that needs to come back before then as well. But we will take the feedback from today. We'll have a look as well, particularly at the relationship elements and the land use growth part. And we'll send back an updated version of this, which you'll have ample time to have looked at before the next session. And then we will have another workshop talking about it. And depending on where we get to from there, we can then move to have it ready to discuss with the board, or we can have another discussion. So there are a couple of areas where we wanted to get some advice to support it as well. So we'll also do that sitting behind it.
And what about the constitution? When will we get the first draft of the constitution?
That's a question.
Yes. Mike, you might be working on that.
Mike is working on that, yeah.
Mike, when will we get the first draft?
There's a well-developed draft that's just being reviewed by Maz and team. So I'll just have to loop in with Maz and then we'll come back to you on timing, but I don't think it'll be too far away.
Okay, because I feel like the constitution and the SOE need to be read together.
Well, that was my point before, that it's quite complex. We need to sort of keep plugging the pieces back together.
Yeah, I'll check in with Maz because it might make sense for the constitution, the SOE, and the next iteration of that transition framework to all come back at an additional workshop. If there isn't, I thought there wasn't another one till June. There might be another one sometime in May that we can tackle too.
Can I just ask if we have other suggestions or things that were concerns as we read through it, because we have only had it, this morning and late last night. What's the best way to feed those through to you?
Feel free to email them to me, Nikki.
Okay. Thanks, Penny.
All right, have a break for lunch. Come back.
It's starting at 12, so
Yeah.
We do just start.
Thanks all.
Thanks, everybody. Look, just wanted to let you know that, sorry it's me today, and not sorry that Rebecca is joining me. And Paul, unfortunately, has succumbed to a cold, but he is online, so if you've got any questions for Paul, he's there. So I'm just going to take us through this. I think for context, we were asked to come back and have a workshop to just share the engagement with you ahead of actually undertaking the engagement. So that's why we're here. That was specifically requested. So I don't know how many questions you have or whether you want to enter into the philosophical discussions about Frankton versus Queenstown, about lease versus build, but that's really not why we're here today. To be, and I'm saying that very respectfully. We're at a point in the process where we've been through a very detailed piece of work, looking locationally across the Wakatipu Basin. And the decision was that actually we needed to have a conversation with the community about Frankton versus Queenstown CBD. And so this informal feedback is actually about that conversation. So we're just giving you an overview of the engagement approach. I'm not going to really go through all of the background and context. I'm hoping that you've been able to have a look at that, and then we'll just go into some any discussion that you want to have around the engagement itself. That's the approach that we're taking. And the objectives, I guess I'll just go straight there, is understanding those community values and preferences for the location. And I just want to say that if you've had a chance to look at the engagement piece that Rebecca has authored, it's a little bit of a different approach. It's actually quite a nice approach, I think, to try and get the community thinking about what's good for them, as opposed to what our council staff need pragmatically and practically as an accommodation solution. So it's a really nice approach. And we want to really hear from a very diverse range of voices. And again, the engagement itself, Rebecca's put a lot of time and effort into coming up with some ways of capturing those diverse voices and understanding our community needs. Obviously, access and barriers are key to it also. So there you go. There's a whole bunch of ways that we intend to engage. I won't run through all of those. You may have some different thoughts or suggestions. This is to refresh you on what we talked about back in November when we took you through the why about where we're at. And I'm hoping, do you want me to leave that on screen for a minute? Hugh, you look like you're having another read of it. It's fine. Did you want me to run through this? No, look, we've had it before and you've got it in your pack.
I think we're okay.
Perfect, okay. And then obviously what's already in place, and we did include in your pack the MCA, CBA independent assessment. Yeah, we're asking the community their preferences between credible location scenarios, as I already talked about, community values, and also we have included in there the views on ownership and delivery models, and a little bit about how the engagement is framed up. Anything you want to say on that?
Oh, not really. I mean, I think what we're trying to do is sort of shift away from that more technical side of the conversation and then kind of talk more about, what works best for them in their daily lives and, what actually matters most to them when it comes to accessing these sorts of services.
I think our intention after today is for this engagement to go live on the 18th of May. And it'll go for just over a month through to the 21st of June. And I think we've kind of probably covered off this slide.
So
yes,
I was just going to say the things that will not, you've spelled out what the things that won't do, but will it provide opportunity for individual proposals to,
it's an
landowners or whatever to put a proposal forward?
Yeah, and I think if you have a look at the questions there, there's room for and anything else. Yeah. So I mean, we do expect that we will certainly receive some proposals. There are already some proposals we're aware of, and that all comes into the mix. At the end of the day, I think we're all violently in agreement that we just need a decision about the future of QLDC's Wakatipu Basin accommodation, whatever that may be. And so, I think anything can be included, and we will see anything included.
Do you think the question around Wanaka is helpful?
So we thought about that. That's a good point. We did think about that. We've got a really substantial presence in Wanaka now.
Oh, no,
and
I know, but I just don't want to create expectation that we're
No.
anywhere near to trying to solve that.
We toyed with in or out, but at the end of the day, it seems wrong to be silent on it. And I think if we put out a document and it's entirely specific to the Waikatepu Basin and we don't reference the Wanaka issue, then I think Wanaka might quite rightly say, well, you know, typical, you've kind of not thinking about us. And we are thinking about what happens in Wanaka. And so it was just a way of saying, look, that's also a conversation we're going to need to have. And we didn't want to be silent on that.
I think it's good intuition because
you're doing it. It's not like a broad question. It's just like
quite thoroughly.
Yeah. I mean, if this asset goes ahead, will it be equally funded by Wanaka ratepayers?
Yeah.
I'm going to leave that hanging.
Well, I think it raises, there was something I found I don't know, surprising in the analysis that there's not much consideration of how accessible a new facility or facilities, presupposing that, in the Waikatepu Basin would be accessible to people from the Upper Clifford. So now, and given having had a wonderful day in Wanaka just last week, but the facilities there are not great. So there's a bigger question, and hopefully through this, it's going to be asked in such a way that those questions will come to the surface and maybe some suggestions. Because I think when you look at the relative growth of the two, should we be putting most of the eggs in one contemporary basket, or should we be looking to also spread the risk as well? I don't know.
Well, I guess the answer is that staff are not, site specific.
No.
So we're like you, councillors. We serve the district, and a lot of our services are, they're district-wide services. So whether they're co-located or located separately, there are people in Wanaka today working on issues that relate to the Waikatepu. So
I totally appreciate this, and I think it's something that's sitting in the back of my head as we go through these really high rates increases for small communities who are told you pay for the infrastructure that benefits you, but then before they do that, they're paying for all of these other general district-wide based costs. And when, like I keep saying, when things are centralized, they're socialized, and so you look at the equity piece and you go, people who are right next door to facilities are paying the same as people who are an hour and a half from facilities. And there's clearly a difference in value uplift that isn't acknowledged, which harbors this resentment when we have these engagements. So in the same respect that you put Wanaka in there, and I think rightly so, I think having that conversation around acknowledging that inequity may be helpful to keep things constructive, because when I'm going back to Luggett and Harley and proposing what their thoughts are around the civic administration building in Queenstown, I know the answer that's going to happen. So I'm just trying to sort of front foot that in a way that keeps the conversation on the right tack, acknowledges the feelings and the other stuff, but it allows us to be pragmatic.
I mean, just going to that point, part of that might be telling the story of why a little bit just at the front end, because saying that the status quo doesn't exist, where we need to make some changes. We know you don't like, but the civic buildings are fundamentally unpopular anywhere in the world where people want to build an office building for the staff, but fundamentally, that doesn't mean there isn't a case for them. It just means they're perceived unpopular. I'll give Nikki a chance.
Oh, thanks, Q. I was just going to text you. Thanks for putting Wanaka in, and I think that's important. And it's important that it's not just a token thing as well. I tend to agree with John and Cody. Now, what was I going to say? Jeez. Two things. One was the context around local government reform. I suspect people know about this and will get it, in the mix. So have we considered that? And then the other question was, is this really the right time to get sensible answers back from the community?
So Dawn Cromwell, Steve.
Well, that was to me the regional council building sort of Rest being the what else?
Oh, and the second question goes to the fuel crisis and everything that we're facing at the moment, as well as the reform bit, right?
Well, I guess the answer is that our staff don't disappear when we're in a crisis. We do have leases that are coming to an end, and we do need to actually get some guidance from you about what we are going to do next in the accommodation question. So I agree. I completely, it'd be great not to do anything right now with the fuel crisis and not to rattle any cages any further, I guess, and just park some things up. But this is one that has a pragmatic output for this organisation, and actually, I assume, we can only assume, and that's what we're going to test, is of very strong interest to our communities. So, that's what we're going through. It is an informal engagement. So I guess if the community, Nikki, wants to say in this engagement, now's not the right time, please don't, ask us these questions at the moment. We don't feel like it. They will tell us, and if we get absolutely no responses whatsoever, then that will be the answer, won't it?
It was more a case of things are tough, you're going to get a different answer than if you asked it later, when things aren't quite so tough. But when things are not going to be quite so tough, isn't quite clear, right?
Well, I don't know if there's ever going to be a time when things aren't so tough.
Yeah.
20 years
I
ago.
do.
The lesson of all the crises we've been through is keep going.
I do wonder if that, because I think that people have this impression that we're spending this money but really it's a replacement for rent. So we're spending the money regardless, and it's about whether you buy a house or keep renting, right? But I do wonder, is there any way we can build some of that information into the engagement just to help people understand? I know it's never gonna, you're still gonna have people saying, don't spend the money, don't spend the money. But for those that do want to read it and understand it, a little piece in there about this money is being spent anyway. And in fact, and I don't know how much detail you go into, but
That's in the case, like what Quentin said.
Rebecca actually just did say to me, she suggested that she could add in a piece of why now, and put a little bit of that
and it could be, just because I do think, we obviously are very aware that there's 4 different offices here, and the extreme amount of time wasted that's just, and that's just that simple one. So obviously not going to be able to go into all the details, but something as well written as some of the other stuff you put in here about that for those people. And I don't think that will solve everyone. We will still get plenty of people saying, don't do it, don't spend the money. But for those people who are going to spend some time putting some thought into it, understanding that this is actually a benefit, hopefully, for the community.
It's not nice to have.
Yeah. And also the options include carrying on with a leasing option, not just looking at building something as well. My question was, just saw in the media summaries the other day about the tender for the QLDC of the future for assessing that. How does that feed into this process in terms of, the QLDC of the future might be bigger, smaller, who knows? But.
So, Paul's online and I'll do my best, but obviously we, in the beginning, there was a business case. So it sounds a bit biblical. There was a business case. We looked at staff. We did a whole workforce piece which looked at, staff numbers, future proofing, etc. The number of staff doesn't need to inform the final accommodation solution, and that's because we have things like flexible working. We do have staff who want to continue to work in Wanaka, so it's really what size do we actually want to build to? What do we actually want to include in that build? Is it really actually just a building that contains staff and some meeting rooms? Or is it more of a civic heart? I mean, these are still decisions that need to be worked through. We have worked through all of this in the past, and there's plenty of material supporting all of that. But Paul, did you want to chime in with something that's slightly more considered than I managed to come up with?
Well, any building has a commercial life of 30 to 50 years. So whether that's leased or not, I guess the horizon for this extends out quite some time. Where we're at in terms of floor area and bodies at the moment, I mean, I am catching up with Maz directly after this, and Nikki, there are some considerations around that. We do operate on a reduced footprint currently, and notwithstanding that we have offices in Frankton as well at QEC, and that's often quite busy too. So I think, and just going to respond to Melissa there, you're right. What we're talking about here is a marginal difference between what our current costs are for the 5 leases we've got, or 4 leases we've got around town, and what a new lease might be. But there are efficiencies to that, and we did provide quite a bit of that information last time as part of the statement of proposal for Manawa around the cost affordability, and that was put through in the LTP. But going back to where Rebecca's going with this, it's more really around the values and access and lived experience for the community and the people, rather than the detail that we will work through. But we really want to get this step now so we can get some feedback from the community around what it means for them, around where we're located, and then everything else will fold off the back of that, all that detail, and we'll work through that. But this is really another stepping back probably from the Boffa Miscall work that was done, and there were quite a few assumptions in that. So we're stepping back before those assumptions and allowing the community to put those inputs in and just sort of test that element. And that's the bit we want to try to capture here.
Yeah, the reason that I asked my question was that, with the 3 waters going out and all the local government reforms, you might think, well, maybe the workforce will reduce a bit, and those vacancies might reduce. I suspect that it won't really change much. I don't think there's a huge number of 3 waters, and we're already, we have a lot of work being done by maybe not enough staff anyway. But if for some reason it did shrink, it might change where you would think about, looking at buildings or current spaces. But and maybe something along the lines of Church Street, if you could get all the floors of that building, might be enough for some size of organisation in the future. But I don't know how that will fit into this particular process, because it's probably a little bit ahead of where that's going to be. The other question I had was something that I can't remember now.
I mean, one of the concerns, and I've expressed it before, is that we're asking a question, whether it's in Queenstown or in Frankton is actually not going to be the primary informant of our final decision, because as has been highlighted, there's a whole bunch of different delivery mechanisms, and the delivery mechanism will be the final determinant of which decision we choose. Will be the one that's most cost effective, the one that can get delivered, the one that might be come down to whether we need to purchase land or not, or whether someone else can provide the land. So that's always been my challenge here. We're not choosing between final solutions. We're just choosing a location which might fall over, because we know down here we're reliant on a joint venture or a private partnership, or in you know, in Frankton, there might be a third party who can deliver it without any fish hooks in terms of land ownership, and we just do a leasing model. So those things, I'm really conscious those things are going to determine what we choose in the end, not whether we'd like to be in town or in Frankton. But at least it gives the pointers in a direction. I get that.
You're absolutely right, and I guess, and I'm not shaking off responsibility in any way, but we are actually delivering on a decision of council to undertake this consultation. That is what was required of us, and that is what we are doing. But you're probably right, and ahead of you is going to be a very difficult decision. But you will want to understand the cost options, and it may be surprising.
Yeah. Well, the other thing I was going to mention, my other question I did remember was that going back to what Paul said, you know, the building might be, you know, a 30 to 50 year time frame. And I remember thinking this when people raised the issue of, you know, all the possibility of having something like this mile, was that, you know, that might be a location for 20 or 30 years time, maybe, when populations have changed. And it also made me think that, you know, maybe people are saying, well, Frankton's the place now. Maybe in 20 or 30 years' time, it might be a stronger argument to have something back in Queenstown. Who knows how things are going to change over that time frame? We can't.
Thank you. Just a question around the questions. What's the information or you're trying to gain from the business question? Do you own or run a business in Queenstown?
I had a question around that one too. Because I also thought some people have a business in Queens, like Wanaka people have businesses in Queenstown but don't. You know, that type of.
Or you might want to talk a little bit more about that one.
What were you trying to get from that question, Paul, about owning a business?
Yeah, we're really interested in people's views and opinions, but we also like to understand a bit about them and whether they're representing a business or not, or have a business interest. We know, for example, Remarks Park and they have put in submissions in the past because they have a commercial interest. Similarly, we'd be interested to hear from people in the CBD, Queenstown CBD, or for Wanaka, whoever. I guess it was just trying to differentiate between a resident and, sorry, not a resident, trying to differentiate between households and firms.
Yeah, I'm still a bit vague on the why for that question.
I guess it's fairly aligned to general sort of demographic information we include in a lot of our consultations. So, you know,
that's what I assumed it was.
Wouldn't it help then if the question was more open?
Do you own a business?
If you own a business or businesses, where are they? Because these could be,
where do you work?
Could be simple, you know,
what do you do?
You know, there are businesses, for example, and I was only joking earlier, but I'm serious now, that are based in Cromwell, but all of the businesses here.
Yeah, same with one.
Yep. So that question is peculiarly narrow in the way, maybe not how it's intended, but the way it's written.
Yeah. Good point. Thank you.
So, second question is another question related one. How often do you access council services? And I think what the question is asking is, how often do you access physical council services? Right. Which is not necessarily translated in that question, because a lot of our community isn't engaging physically with our council, but they will be doing a lot of it online. So I assume, and then there's some questions underneath that also relate to physical contact with council services.
Okay, thank you.
Every time they turn the tap on.
That and all sorts of other things that aren't on that list, like the event centre, swimming pools, and fields.
Yeah, correct. So we're talking about the care.
More related to what's in the civic administration buildings.
Not only when I read it, I really liked the different approach, but I was like, could visualize it more, and I would love. I mean, ideally, I was like, it would be cool to do a video and show it so people. Because those visual people or people that don't want to read, like there's a lot of writing,
aren't probably going to engage in that. And I was like, if it was just a video and you could show where it is and people could get the sense of what you're talking about.
The hard thing is we don't know where they are though, so that's we're going through this process. So this
Yeah, but
is
there-
just
we have
conceptual.
we have conceptual conceptual pictures in the other document of both here and out of Frankton. So there are visuals out there. I don't know, I just think it's easy to say that, but when people, like, the whole point is how they feel. That's in the, you know, you're only like part of the way there, but and it's probably there's more money and everything, but some kind of visual.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think importantly, this is some early content that's going to be developed with our designers into something more visual. So that's
Okay, so my other question to that was what were your ideas with the engagement with less engaged people?
So something that works quite well for us is the sort of unmanned engagement stations. That's a much more passive way of bringing people who might not actually want to engage in a council process. It feels formal, it feels scary, they don't have time. So they can rock up to the event centre while their kids are doing whatever, or you know, they might just be at the gym and they can participate in an unmanned process. So that's something that we're looking at doing. And we'll also be, I mean, I haven't completely discussed this with Paul yet, but rolling him out to various be after 5 with the children.
I think the community associations actually, especially recently, but they get really good engagement and like their little I shouldn't underline, their Facebook pages, you know, when they just put something out, because it's more trusted than perhaps us. So like giving them the full scope to be able to put it to their channels, and yeah, I think that would be a nice, easy way to like, get into those small communities.
We do that by Abby Mott, which is great. We provide her with content that she can put out via her networks with the community association. We also are able to post to most of their pages directly, but I agree with you that sometimes getting into it with them as opposed to us is
and we quite often put you know, any engagement of this nature, especially of this nature. We'll use the likes of the RTOs and chambers, and they push it out in their newsletters, so we'll do all of that.
So just going back to the comment you made earlier, so this was mandated through a resolution, through a council decision, so I get that. And with that in mind, I suppose we have no choice but to go out and do this. But I have to say, I sort of agree with what Quentin sort of said earlier. Like, I don't really know what we get back from it. If I think back when we started to go through the whole Manawa, the project Manawa stuff and the consultation there, and that was a CAB, it was performing arts, it was a library, it was this whole big community hub thing here. So are we still going out and asking for community comment on if that's what they want us to be delivering on their behalf? Yeah, I know that.
We did that, and this was actually the result from that consultation, asking about that. The community very strongly said you need to consider other options.
So just the CAB.
Yeah.
Yeah, and again, I guess if we have to do the consultation, we have to do the consultation. We're going to ask the questions, but like it feels more like what's a head count? What size do we need? What are the clearance as well? We don't know what size the head count is. We don't know where it needs to be within this. We don't know that. But it's all going to come down to where we're going to put it. And we've got a 10-year plan. Most businesses don't have a 10-year plan, but they still sign leases and have an idea of how big they're going to grow, how small they're going to be. So, like, I get that we've got to go and do it, but I'm not quite sure exactly what we're getting back from it that's really, really useful if we actually want to make decisions in the next 5 years about moving into a
I think what it will give you is assurance in principle that the decision you're going to have to make is the right one. And I can remember the hearings that we had on the back of that Manawa consultation, and you know, you'll recall there were people very, very passionate that we needed to ask this question. Locationally, CBD versus.
I suppose there's many people saying the CBD is satisfactory.
That is quite a likely outcome, and I don't think that should stop us doing it, because that was the direction that the community felt like they were being pushed into cab at Manawa. And they were like, more options should be considered. This is part of the process. Even if we got 80% saying, no, it should be at Manawa, if it financially doesn't make sense, that still won't be the decision that we make. But I do think that this is part of the process that we should still do.
Yeah, the bit I was going to follow on from is going, well, what's the outcome of this? We end up with a preferred site, but we end up doing a EOI or a request for proposal or something around, you know, and hypothetically say it's Frankton, say we put expressions of interest out for that, but at the same time that, you know, something evolves at Project Mother.
Be transparent about it. And you say it's too expensive. Thank you, community, for your, but and we heard that you also don't.
Yeah, so that's what I'm saying.
It won't be as narrow as that, I don't
Yeah.
think. I mean, there's still, you will be presented with options. You will be presented with options that will be costed. Because at the end of the day, you know, and I'm not presupposing that, but at the end of the day, it's quite feasible that if we built a building on our own land, ultimately that might be the most cost-effective way of accommodating staff and having some kind of civic component.
Yeah, understand the push and pull on all the different models around operational costs versus capital costs versus all the other.
And you often hear, why don't we just let someone build it for us and we just lease it? But they need to make a profit from doing that, obviously. And
So,
it's a long
going back to this, so we're choosing between town centre and Frankton. Well, has to be the outcome of this, that there'll be a preference. Now, I'm not saying it's locked in, but there'll be a preference.
Not a vote.
No, but that will be determined by this. The question is, how do we get to the cost benefit analysis between different proposals so that we can actually make a decision?
Well, there's already been, that work has already been done.
But it hasn't included the third party proposal. So we're not measuring this, we're not measuring Project Manawa against, you know, the model that you identified that someone built as a building.
Steps for you in terms of making a decision. Paul, do you want to comment on that at all?
Yeah, first of all, we have done that work. We did go through third party lease versus the Manawa versus the status quo. But we will have to do that again. I think what we're trying to do here is find out what the community preference is in terms of location. And then within that, we would then go through another process on delivering the best economic outcome or the best value for the ratepayer, most cost-effective solution within that location. We're trying to narrow the view here. So, yeah.
There was that extra document, and that was really helpful.
And then, and there may well be a proposal that is in the mix as well. So
I was only the other thing I was going to say was my rider on when we've talked about this before. We did have in the town centre options for Project Manawa existing status quo and other leases, and they were compared with the future cost. But my rider on that is that council constructing its own building has a much higher level of risk than leasing a building. So even though the construction cost versus the leasing cost might be very similar over 20 years or 30 years, it's just that risk level of building something is so much higher that it could totally blow itself out of the water.
Yeah.
Whereas with
the comments earlier as well, like what if we want to be in Ladies Mile in 15 years or 20 years? You own the building, you sell it.
Right, we're off topic. We're just talking about this.
These are the things.
I've just got some specific.
This next step.
In terms of the actual consultation document, can you just bring that up? Further on.
no, it's not in this actually.
Oh, sorry, it's not because it was in our pack, but it's not.
No.
So, in terms of the wording of the two different places, I'm just feeling that the last paragraph around Frankton seems to promote Frankton a little bit, and the last paragraph of the town centre seems to be a bit negative about the CBD. So I'd like to see them be consistent, so that it's not promoting one or the other.
The opposite. You know, so yeah, they probably attempted to try to balance it.
Well, this one says Frankton is our, this one sounds like Frankton says is our commercial hub, which I'm not sure I agree with, but it's saying it's positive, and then in the town centre it says whilst it might be further away from the high growth areas.
But it has.
I think those are two different statements. Yeah, but that's not what we're going out to. We're going out to say these are the two imaginations. If you want to talk about negatives about the CBD being high away from the growth areas, you should also talk about the transport problems that will occur if there's a building in Frankton.
Yeah.
So it's two different things. So I just think it needs to be consistent. You know what I mean?
I agree.
But I'd say the first couple of paragraphs, the town centre is way more emotionally charged than.
Well, it just needs to be consistent. I'm just saying that it needs to be, yeah, it's hard, it's very hard.
Yeah.
I think we might maybe need to have something in there about traffic both ways.
Well, yeah, I just think it's just a consistent sort of ideas.
It probably needs that we probably, you know, there's a few assumptions we've made as well, and it probably needs to outline some of those because it doesn't. They're not comparing apples with apples. They're not going to be the same number of car parks. They're not going to be the same number of whatever. So it's.
This is all the stuff that will come out of the community discussion, though, right? This is why we need to start, as Stephen said, with a really clear. You know, it needs to be really neutral, and I would go beyond the two, because if we really are blue sky thinking and allowing people to put in their thoughts, which is the beauty of this, don't discount Lady Smile, don't discount anywhere really. So really make it clear that these are just.
We've moved on. Whether you, well, unfortunately we've moved on from that, Nikki. We're not at that place.
Sorry, what are you talking about?
You
need to repeat
those
that.
sites were carried forward by the council decision that were asked to.
No, so what is the purpose of this? So the beauty of this was that people get to have their say about whatever, wherever, and put their Could you just let me finish, please? Get to have their say on, you know, where they think it should be, where they think it shouldn't be, what their reasons are. And the beauty of this is that we get to stay completely open-minded, receive all of their feedback. And to me, the next step is probably an EOI, and this will help us scope that up. You know, and we can be then as open or as closed as we like. But you know, there's no point going out having this sort of really loose thing if we are actually focusing on two sites. And then, but there's this little line that we say we're doing others. So I think it's really important that we, even at this workshop, send the message that we're not discounting anything at this point, because there may be a developer who would like to, you know, put in a bid on an EOI that says, hey, we'd like to build something on your land at Ladies Mile. I don't know. Or something.
Yeah,
So,
I want to support you on that argument, Nikki. Just referencing Aegis's report on the airport. Again, highly contentious, but great result.
Oh no.
Well, yeah, no. Not the fact that they're reporting, but the way they went about it was on one hand they were saying close the airport, get rid of it. On the other hand, they were saying international flights, because people knew on the spectrum where it was, they could make an informed decision in the middle. I think if we go out and do option 2 or 3 instead of option 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5, people are always going to accuse of, you know, not finding the full spectrum of what it is. And the one thing I can consider that's coming to mind and constantly reinforcing is all chips in one basket the right strategy for a district? Like, do we put in an option, we split services and do 2 smaller buildings versus 1 big building, 1 in Wanaka, 1 in Queenstown, and then certain services go, community services are run out of Wanaka and planning is running out of Queenstown, and you know, there is a different approach to it. But the point is, what is 1 in 5 in that spectrum? Because if we go out, you know, no one wants to come back and have any accusation that there was predetermination or that there was a lack of scope of framework thinking. I'm just trying to support the productivity or, you know, the usefulness of this engagement in this point. So
I support both those sort of statements, really, that I may have made a submission along these lines at one point, I'm not sure, but there might well be value, and there's conflict of interest, that there might well be value in still having presence in town, and though, because local
authority administrative buildings serve more purposes than just a place for council staff to be and for the public to access services. They also, and increasingly, and really successful projects, some of which I've been involved in, are multi-agency facilities or adjacent to other agencies. So maybe that I would prefer, I like the way this has been put together. Maybe there's too many questions perhaps, but I don't know. But it could be a little more open again. What do people value? Do they want still access to services in Queensland? I think there's some real value for it, particularly when you look at the demographics of the populations too. So we're only looking superficially. Whereas almost all of the other agencies now have offices in Frankton that are not ideal. That some of them, their leases are running out. There are agencies with offices in town whose leases are running out. And so there's an opportunity, so there's another community, if you like. So there's several communities. There's the communities, there's the community of developers who might want to get on. Then there's a community of other organisations who would benefit from us being located in possibly several places. Anything's better than 5, and 2 might be even ideal. In particular, coming out from a risk management perspective, if 1 gets taken out, you've still got plan B.
Well, I'm going to say we're committed to going through this process, and those are all really interesting, very interesting comments that will inevitably be discussed on the other side of this. Manawa remains live. That is still our land, and we still have in train, and we spoke to you about this, whether you recall or not, back in November during the induction. What's happening on the Manawa side in terms of the land swaps and so on, and that's still live. That's coming back to you. So you still have opportunity there, and that's interesting what you say, because is there an opportunity to put something that is more community minded, i.e. you could actually put your chamber on the Manawa site, but have that as actually a place where people can come together and become citizens. You could have the staff accommodation. So you will have options on the other side of this and decisions to make. I guess our, the really interesting thing is that the tough one for us as an organisation is that every 3 years there's an election and there's a different view. And we've been trying to resolve this now for a very, 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 very long time. And that's
I am
tough.
conscious of that, is that we're down a particular road, and
we have refined it now to the tab because it has become an acute, need to come up with a final decision about what this is going to look like. But it doesn't mean that we're, in some respects, Cody, Nikki, you're right. That's why we have the other there. We're not precluding anyone actually coming up with a bloody good idea, a great suggestion, something we didn't understand or know about. So, let's not just have our head in the sand. But, Matt's also right in that we have actually been around the traps, and this was trying to kind of narrow the
field. That's my concern, is that we're, I suppose, giving you guys difficult feedback.
It's fine. It's fine, but I do think these conversations, this discussion and debate will need to come again. It will happen again, and we'll get through this at end of June, and then we'll need to get some, we'll need to put some time in to get this right, so that whatever comes before you enables that whole discussion and start to get into some decision points.
In context, there is still going to be Wanaka offices in the future of whatever happens next. So I think that needs to be provided in context.
Yes.
So that Wanaka doesn't feel like, oh, by the way, admin buildings in Wanaka are disappearing if we do this.
No, that's certainly not the intent. I would want to say that very clearly.
That has to be part of the context of it.
Yes, well, it may be that, I think it does actually, it does have to be, and that's why it's in here as well.
And ironically, the most obvious one in Wanaka is still subject to a joint venture with Matahu. Because of the land ownership issues. So, yeah, so it's.
Well, you also have a live joint venture with Ngāi Tahu on Manawa for the cab.
Yeah.
So that's just sitting in the bay.
I thought just the point that he made just before, talking about bringing all those community services that can't afford, we're in here, there's actually a project underway.
That's a separate one. That's, yeah, but ideally they'd be close to one another, but that's another story.
Just reminding everybody around the state what that is. We sit there with Michelle and whatever talk about
The other question, the CCO could be co-located in this building. Is that something that we have, I don't want to say authority over? Is it just sort of like a recommendation, or is that just part of the analysis of what's
No, so we're only just having an initial discussion about that to test the intent. But it's very difficult. At the moment, we've only got an agent who's there to establish the transition, setting up the board, etc., etc. Once you've got the board and the chair in play, then that's clearly a very important decision that they will need to make. But if we start to get a sense of that intent, that can inform that decision. And should we consider it as a co-location opportunity?
And I mean, clearly you need a certain amount of flexibility in whatever space you utilise, because you need to be able to breathe and contract if things.
Yeah, I don't mind if there's a portion of it that's for
So
profit.
we don't want it to be, I mean, we don't want it to actually trip us up. But I think it would be naive not to have, at least to start having a conversation about that to see if there's any.
Yeah, well, on that, thanks. We also have another CCO or CTO that is very good at building or commissioning the building of facilities, and that way we could have
Linda pregnant.
Yeah, well, that doesn't matter where, yeah, but that's not location specific, but then we could then rent it and the money would come back to us as a dividend. So there's a range of options down the track as far as that's concerned.
Yeah, well, let's park that one. I mean, it might be a stretch for the board, but potentially.
That's happened elsewhere.
But I think questions that are being asked here are the ones that we last year wanted asked. Answered, I guess. So particularly the ones about location, fairly broad, and the how it's delivered, but also the fact that there is space for other ideas to still come into it. So, because when we consulted on a CAB at the Project Manawa site, we were getting all those suggestions anyway.
Thanks, Kevin. Okay.
All right.
Well,
we'll try and wrap it up unless there's any, but we'll, I suppose, as you said, we're not making any decisions. You are going out with this or something that looks like this, and we'll see what comes back. And I suppose the signal that when that occurs, we'll want some fairly clear guidance on the next steps about how we find the different options and evaluate them.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, that's been really, really useful actually, and some good suggestions there. So it's great. Thank you, everybody. We'll rock on.
Thank you. The result for the next election.
No.